Before tonight ends, you're going to understand why you wouldn't survive 24 hours in ancient Egypt. Not the Egypt of golden pharaohs and movie magic, the real Egypt. The one that would break you faster than you can imagine. Welcome back to the Midnight Library. Right now, across the world, thousands of people are here with you, some wrapped in darkness at 3 a.m., others watching the sun rise with their morning coffee, all about to discover something that will change how you see history forever. If you're ready for a journey that goes deeper than any documentary, that reveals truths most stories hide, hit that like button now. Subscribe if you want more of these immersive explorations. And drop a comment. Tell me where you are and what time it is. I read every single one, and tonight especially, I want to know. How many of you are brave enough to follow me 4,000 years into the past, into a world where survival was never guaranteed, where every day was a test of endurance you cannot imagine? Adjust your pillows. Dim the lights. Because we're about to step into the Middle Kingdom of ancient Egypt, and nothing will prepare you for what daily life actually meant. Let's begin. Tonight, we're embarking on a journey that will take us more than 4,000 years into the past, to one of history's most celebrated civilizations. We're traveling to ancient Egypt, but not the Egypt you've seen in movies, not the land of golden pharaohs and mysterious tombs, not the realm of Hollywood adventure and romanticized history. Tonight, we're going to the real Egypt, the Egypt of sweat and sun and endless labor, the Egypt where the vast majority of people lived lives that were harsh, exhausting, and shaped by forces entirely beyond their control. We're going specifically to the Middle Kingdom, a period that stretched from around 2055 BCE to approximately 1650 BCE, an era often called the Classical Age of Egyptian civilization, a time of political stability, artistic achievement, and imperial expansion. But here's the truth that those gleaming museum exhibits and those dramatic documentaries rarely tell you. The Middle Kingdom, for all its cultural achievements, for all the beautiful literature and impressive monuments that came out of this period, was not a time you would want to live in. Not if you were ordinary. Not if you were one of the countless farmers, laborers, craftspeople, and servants who made up the overwhelming majority of Egyptian society. If you were somehow transporting back to this world, dropped into the body of a common person living along the Nile during the reign of Senusret III or Amenemhat II, you would face immediate, overwhelming challenges that would test every assumption you have about survival, comfort, and human endurance. This isn't a story designed to frighten you or to sensationalize the past. This is a calm, detailed, thoroughly researched examination of what daily life actually looked like for an ordinary Egyptian during the Middle Kingdom. We're going to walk through a typical day, explore the realities of housing, food, water, labor, health, and social control. And we're going to understand, piece by piece, why a modern person, with a modern immune system, modern expectations, and modern sensibilities, would struggle desperately to survive even 24 hours in this world. We're going to see why the gap between our lives and theirs is so vast that it almost defies comprehension. So get comfortable. Adjust your pillows, pull up your blankets, dim the lights if you haven't already. Let the modern world fade into the background for a while, and let's step together into ancient Egypt, into the heat and dust and relentless rhythm of the Middle Kingdom, and discover what it really meant to be alive in that distant time. The Middle Kingdom began with violence and ambition, with a Theban ruler named Mentuhotep II who managed, around 2055 BCE, to reunite Egypt after more than a century of fragmentation and civil conflict. This period of division, known to historians as the First Intermediate Period, had been a time of chaos, when the central authority of the Old Kingdom pharaohs had collapsed, when regional governors called nomarchs had carved the country into competing territories, when trade had broken down, when the irrigation systems had fallen into disrepair, and when famine and social upheaval had become common. Egypt, which had once been unified under powerful kings who built the pyramids at Giza, had fractured into rival power bases, with rulers in Heracleopolis controlling much of Lower Egypt and the Delta, and rulers in Thebes, far to the south in Upper Egypt, gradually building their strength. Mentuhotep II, who came from this Theban line, managed to defeat the northern rulers and bring the entire country back under a single throne. He took the throne name Nebhipeta, which means Lord of the Steering Oar of Ra, and he adopted the Horus name, Uniter of the Two Lands, explicitly claiming to have restored Mat, the cosmic order and balance that Egyptians believed was essential for the world to function properly. He built his mortuary complex at Deir el-Bahari, on the west bank of the Nile near Thebes, a stunning terraced temple that would later inspire Queen Hatshepsut's famous temple built alongside it 500 years later. Mentuhotep's reunification marked the beginning of what we now call the Middle Kingdom, and it ushered in a period of recovery, rebuilding, and eventual prosperity. But the real transformation came with the 12th dynasty, which began around 1991 BCE when a powerful official named Amenemhat I seized power from the last weak king of the 11th dynasty. Amenemhat had served as vizier, the highest administrative position in the land, and he used his power and connections to take the throne for himself, founding a new royal line. He moved the capital from Thebes to a new city called Ichtoi, which means Caesar of the Two Lands, located somewhere near modern-day Lisht in the Fayum region, though the exact site has never been definitively identified. This move was strategic, placing the capital at a more central location between Upper and Lower Egypt, better positioned to control the entire country and to manage the vital agricultural resources of the Fayum. The 12th dynasty would produce some of the most powerful and effective rulers in Egyptian history. The names Amenemhat and Senusret, sometimes written as Senwosret or Sesostris, alternate down through the dynasty like a royal refrain. Amenemhat I, Senusret I, Amenemhat II, Senusret II, Senusret III, Amenemhat III, and finally Amenemhat IV and Queen Sopneferu, who ruled briefly at the end of the dynasty. These rulers, particularly Senusret III and Amenemhat III, were remembered for centuries afterward as the greatest pharaohs Egypt had ever known, as warrior kings who expanded Egypt's borders, as wise administrators who strengthened the state, and as builders who left monuments that still stand today. Senusret III, who reigned from approximately 1878 to 1839 BCE, was especially significant. He launched military campaigns deep into Nubia, the land to the south, conquering territory and building a chain of massive mud brick fortresses along the Nile to control trade routes and to secure Egypt's access to Nubian gold, incense, ebony, ivory, and other valuable resources. These fortresses, some of which still survive in ruins today, were sophisticated military installations with thick walls, defended gates, complex internal layouts, and systems for storing supplies and housing large garrisons. Senusret III also curtailed the power of the old nomarch families, the regional governors who had threatened to fragment Egypt again. He restructured the administration, creating a more centralized bureaucracy that answered directly to the king, and he ensured that no single family or region could accumulate enough power to challenge the throne. Amenemhat III, who reigned from about 1860 to 1814 BCE, was remembered as a peaceful ruler who focused on internal development. He undertook massive irrigation projects, particularly in the Fayum, transforming what had been a marshy, flood-prone depression into one of the most productive agricultural regions in Egypt. He built temples, including his pyramid complex at Hawara with its famous labyrinth, a vast mortuary temple so complex and filled with chambers and corridors that Greek travelers who saw it centuries later described it as one of the wonders of the world. Under his reign, Egypt prospered, trade flourished, and the state's control reached into every village and town, organizing labor, collecting taxes, and maintaining order. But all of this achievement, all of this stability and prosperity that historians celebrate when they talk about the Middle Kingdom, was built on the backs of ordinary people. People who never saw the inside of a palace, who never learned to read the beautiful hieroglyphic inscriptions that covered temple walls, who never tasted the imported wines and delicacies that graced the tables of the elite. These were the farmers who worked the fields, the labourers who dug the canals, the craftspeople who made the bricks and wove the linen and shaped the pots, the servants who hauled water and ground grain and swept floors. These were the people whose lives were defined by work, by obligation, by survival, and by the constant, overwhelming challenges of simply making it through another day in a world that was unforgiving in ways we can barely imagine. To understand what their lives were like, we need to understand the environment they lived in, the geography and climate that shaped every aspect of their existence. Ancient Egypt was, essentially, the Nile River and the narrow strip of fertile land on either side of it. Beyond that green ribbon of life lay the desert, vast, hostile, and almost entirely uninhabitable. The Egyptians called the fertile land Kemet, the Black Land, named for the rich, dark soil deposited by the river's annual flood. They called the desert Deseret, the Red Land, a place of death, chaos, and danger, where only the dead were buried, and where the living ventured only when necessary. The Nile flowed from south to north, from the highlands of equatorial Africa down through Nubia and Egypt to the Mediterranean Sea. It was the longest river in the world, and it was the reason Egypt existed at all. Without the Nile, there would be no water, no agriculture, no cities, no civilization. Everything depended on the river, and most importantly, everything depended on its annual flood, a natural cycle so regular, so predictable, that the Egyptians built their entire calendar around it. Every year, driven by monsoon rains far to the south in the Ethiopian highlands, the Nile would swell and rise, beginning in late summer. The water would overflow the riverbanks and spread across the floodplain, covering the fields, filling the irrigation basins, and depositing a fresh layer of nutrient-rich silt. This inundation, called Akhit in Egyptian, was the first season of the year. It lasted approximately 4 months, from roughly late June through September, though the exact timing varied slightly from year to year. During Akhit, much of the agricultural land was underwater. Farming was impossible. Villages built on higher ground or on artificial mounds stayed above the flood, but the world changed. The Nile Valley became a vast, shallow lake, dotted with islands of habitation. People moved about by boat. Fish were abundant. And the state mobilized labor for building projects, for quarrying stone, for digging and maintaining canals, for military expeditions, and for all the tasks that required large numbers of workers but could not be done during the farming seasons. When the floodwaters receded, usually in October, the second season began. This was Peret, the season of emergence, when the land emerged from beneath the waters, soft and wet and ready for planting. Peret lasted roughly 4 months, from October through January, and this was when farmers planted their crops, primarily emmer wheat and barley, but also flax for making linen, and various vegetables like onions, lettuce, cucumbers, and pulses. The fields were organized into basins, enclosed by low earthen walls, which could be flooded and drained in a controlled manner using a network of canals. This basin irrigation system was the foundation of Egyptian agriculture, and it required constant maintenance, constant labor to dig, repair, and manage. As the crops grew, the fields needed to be weeded, the irrigation channels needed to be monitored and adjusted, and the water needed to be lifted and distributed using devices like the shadaf, a simple lever system with a bucket on one end and a counterweight on the other. Workers would spend hours raising water from canals and pouring it into smaller channels that fed the fields. This was repetitive, exhausting work, done under the sun, day after day, throughout the growing season. Then came Shemu, the season of harvest, lasting from roughly February through May. This was the hottest, driest time of the year, when the Nile was at its lowest, when the sun blazed down mercilessly, and when temperatures could exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit or more. Shemu was a time of frantic activity. The crops had to be harvested quickly before they overripened, before the heat damaged them, before the next flood came. Workers cut the grain with sickles, bound it into sheaves, carried it to threshing floors where animals trampled it to separate the seeds from the stalks, and then winnowed it by tossing it into the air so the wind would blow away the chaff. Every step was manual labor, every step was done in brutal heat, and every step was essential. And then after the harvest was gathered, after the grain was measured and taxed and stored, after a brief respite, the Nile would begin to rise again, and Akit would return, and the cycle would start over. This rhythm, this endless repetition of flood, planting, growth, harvest, flood, was the heartbeat of Egyptian life. It never changed, it never stopped, and your entire existence revolved around it. If you were an ordinary person living in the Middle Kingdom, your life was tied to this cycle in the most immediate, physical way. You did not observe the seasons from a distance. You lived them. Your body ached from the labor. Your skin burned from the sun. Your stomach cramped from hunger when the harvest was poor. You watched the sky anxiously during Akit, praying that the flood would be neither too high nor too low, because your survival depended on it. Too little water meant drought, crop failure, famine. Too much water meant destruction, drowned livestock, collapsed houses, ruined stores of grain. And you had no control over any of it. You could not make the Nile flood. You could not prevent a bad harvest. You could not store enough surplus to see you through multiple bad years. You were at the mercy of forces far greater than yourself, and the only responses available to you were hard work, prayer, and hope. This was the world you woke up to every morning. This was the reality that shaped every decision, every action, every moment of your day. And now, let's step fully into that world. Let's experience what it would be like to wake up as an ordinary Egyptian in the Middle Kingdom, and let's begin to understand why every aspect of that experience would challenge you in ways you've likely never imagined. Section 2. Waking up in ancient Egypt. Imagine that you open your eyes, and for a moment you don't know where you are. The darkness is complete. There are no streetlights shining through a window, no glow from a phone charging on a nightstand, no digital clock displaying the time. There is only blackness, and the sounds of the night slowly fading into the sounds of early morning. You hear breathing, close by, the soft rhythm of other people sleeping near you. You hear the rustle of movement, fabric shifting, someone turning over on their sleeping mat. You hear from outside the first calls of roosters, the braying of a donkey, the distant sound of voices as your neighbors begin to stir. You lie still for a moment longer, and you become aware of your body. Your back hurts. The surface beneath you is hard, unforgiving. You're lying on a woven mat made from reeds or palm fiber, placed directly on the packed earth floor of your house. There is no mattress, no padding, nothing between you and the ground, except this thin mat that has been compressed and worn from months or years of use. You might have a low wooden bed frame if you're slightly better off, a simple structure with rope or leather straps stretched across it to create a sleeping surface. But even that is not comfortable by any modern standard. There are no springs, no memory foam, no pillows in the way you understand them. Instead, if you have anything to rest your head on, it's a wooden headrest, a carved piece that curves to support the back of your neck while lifting your head off the ground. The purpose of this device is not comfort, but practicality. It keeps insects from crawling into your ears and mouth while you sleep, and it prevents your neck from touching the ground where scorpions and other creatures might be lurking. The headrest is hard, awkward, and takes months or years to get used to. For a modern person accustomed to soft pillows, it would make sleep difficult, leaving your neck stiff and your head aching. You shift your position, and you feel the ache in your joints, the stiffness in your muscles. If you're over the age of 20, you likely already have chronic pain from the work you do. Your lower back is sore from bending over in the fields, from lifting heavy loads, from hours spent in positions that strain your spine. Your knees ache from kneeling, from squatting, from walking long distances over uneven ground. Your shoulders and arms are tight from repetitive motions, from wielding tools, from carrying water jars and baskets of grain. This is normal. This is what every body feels like after years of manual labor without rest, without modern pain relief, without ergonomic tools or any concept of preventing repetitive stress injuries. You sit up slowly, carefully, because sudden movements hurt. The room is still dark, but a faint grey light is beginning to seep through the doorway. Your house has no windows, or if it does, they are small, high openings near the ceiling designed for ventilation rather than light. The walls are thick, made from mud bricks, rectangular blocks formed from Nile mud mixed with chopped straw and dried in the sun. These bricks are not fired in a kiln like modern bricks. They are simply sun-dried, which makes them soft, crumbly, and vulnerable to water damage. The walls are thick, sometimes 2 feet or more, and this thickness serves a purpose. It insulates the interior from the extreme heat outside, keeping the house cooler during the day and warmer during the cold desert nights. The ceiling is low, just high enough for an adult to stand upright or slightly hunched. It's made from palm logs or wooden beams, if wood is available, covered with a layer of reeds, palm fronds, or straw, and then plastered over with more mud. The floor is simply packed earth, hard and uneven, worn smooth in some places, cracked and dusty in others. There is no tile, no wood flooring, no rugs or carpets. The floor is the ground, and it smells of earth and of the accumulated dust of daily life. Your house is small. If you're a typical farmer or laborer, your entire dwelling might consist of 1 or 2 rooms. One room serves as the main living and sleeping area, shared by your entire family. Your spouse sleeps beside you. Your children, if you have them, sleep nearby on their own mats or crowded together on a shared mat. If you have aging parents or other relatives living with you, they are here too. Privacy is not a concept that applies to your sleeping arrangements. Everyone is together always. You hear every sound, every breath, every cough, every snore. If someone is sick, everyone knows immediately. If someone wakes in the night, everyone is disturbed. Personal space simply does not exist. The second room, if you have one, might serve as a storage area, or it might house a few small animals, a goat or some chickens, kept inside at night for safety from predators and thieves. The smell of these animals, their droppings, their feed, mingles with the smell of stored grain, of dried onions hanging from the ceiling, of the smoke from yesterday's cooking fire that still lingers in the air. You stand up, your joints creaking, and you make your way to the doorway. The door is a simple wooden frame with a woven mat or a piece of fabric hanging across it, or perhaps a wooden plank that can be propped in place at night. There is no lock, no security system, just the hope that your neighbors are trustworthy and that no one will disturb you while you sleep. Theft is common, and people are cautious, but there is only so much you can do to protect your few possessions. As you step outside, you're hit by the temperature. Even in the early morning before the sun has fully risen, the air is warm. This is Egypt, and for much of the year, warmth is the baseline. During Shemu, the harvest season in late spring and early summer, the temperature will climb to unbearable levels by midday. But even now, in the relative cool of dawn, you can feel the promise of heat building in the air. You take a deep breath, and you smell the village. It's a complex mixture of scents that a modern nose would find overwhelming. Smoke from cooking fires, both fresh and stale. The earthy smell of mud brick and dust. The sharp, pungent smell of animal dung, both fresh and dried, scattered in the lanes and collected in piles for use as fuel. The sour smell of human sweat and unwashed bodies, because bathing is infrequent and water for washing is precious. The smell of decay, of food scraps rotting in the heat, of refuse piled at the edges of the village. And underneath it all, if the wind is right, the faint, muddy smell of the Nile, the river that gives life to everything. You look around. The village is a cluster of small, flat-roofed houses built close together, sharing walls, with narrow lanes winding between them. There is no planning, no grid pattern, just organic growth as families build wherever there is space. The lanes are just wide enough for a person to walk through, or for a donkey to pass with a load on its back. They are dusty in the dry season, turning to thick, clinging mud during and after the flood. Animal droppings are everywhere. Chickens peck in the dirt. A dog, thin and wary, slinks along a wall. Children who have already woken are playing or working, their voices high and clear in the morning air. You need to relieve yourself. This is one of the first challenges of the day, and it's one that would immediately shock a modern person. There is no bathroom. There is no toilet. These concepts do not exist in your world. Instead, you have a few options, none of them pleasant. Some households have a simple arrangement, a corner of the house or a small enclosed area outside where a ceramic or wooden pot is kept. You squat over this pot, do your business, and when it's full, someone, usually a woman or a child, carries it out and empties it, either into a designated pit at the edge of the village, or into the nearest canal or waterway, or simply dumps it onto a refuse heap. Many people don't even have this. They simply walk to the edge of the village, find a spot screened by a low wall or a pile of debris, squat in the dirt, and relieve themselves there. There is no toilet paper, no leaves necessarily available, no running water to wash with afterward. You might use a handful of sand or dirt to clean yourself, or you might use a scrap of cloth if you have one, or you might simply not clean yourself at all and let the sun and time take care of it. You stand, adjust your garment, and walk back to your house, your hands unwashed, because water is too valuable to use for this purpose every time. The implications of this are profound. Human waste is not managed in any systematic, sanitary way. It accumulates, it seeps into the ground, it contaminates water sources, it attracts flies, which land on the waste, pick up bacteria and parasites, and then land on food, on cooking surfaces, on people's faces. This is one of the primary vectors for disease in ancient Egypt, and it's one of the reasons why gastrointestinal illnesses, parasitic infections, and epidemics are constant threats. You make your way to a large pottery jar near your door, a storage vessel that holds water. This water was collected yesterday, or perhaps the day before, by you or by a member of your family. It was carried from the nearest canal or from the river itself, hauled in smaller jars balanced on the head or shoulder, trip after trip, until this large storage jar was filled. The water is not clear. If you look closely, you can see particles floating in it, sediment stirred up from the bottom of the canal, tiny bits of plant matter, perhaps small insects or their larvae. This water is your drinking water, your cooking water, and your washing water. It is all you have, and it is contaminated with bacteria, parasites, and all manner of microscopic dangers that you cannot see and do not understand. You cup your hands, dip them into the water, and bring the cool liquid to your face. You splash it over your skin, rinse your eyes, wet your lips. The sensation is refreshing, brief relief from the heat and the dust, but the water itself is a risk. Every time you drink it, every time it touches your mouth, you are exposing yourself to potential illness. Dysentery, cholera, typhoid, parasitic worms, these are all spread through contaminated water, and they are endemic in ancient Egypt. You don't know this. You have no concept of germs or bacteria. You simply drink the water because you must, and you accept the stomach cramps, the diarrhea, the fevers as a normal part of life. You rinse your mouth, swishing the water around and spitting it out onto the ground. There is no toothbrush, no toothpaste, no floss. Dental hygiene is minimal at best. Some people chew on the frayed end of a twig to clean their teeth, a practice that provides some mechanical scrubbing but no real cleaning. Others use a paste made from ground-up ingredients, crushed shells, salt, or ash, rubbed onto the teeth with a finger. But these methods are not widespread, and they are not very effective. The result is that dental health is poor across the population. By your mid-20s, your teeth are already showing significant wear and decay. The bread you eat, which makes up the bulk of your diet, is coarse and gritty, made from stone-ground grain that contains tiny particles of sand and grit from the grinding process. Every time you chew, you are wearing down the enamel of your teeth, abrading the surfaces, creating cracks and weak points where decay can take hold. By your 30s or 40s, you likely have multiple cavities, broken teeth, abscesses in your gums. The pain can be constant, throbbing, radiating through your jaw and up into your head. There is no dentist, no filling, no root canal. If a tooth becomes unbearably painful, the only solution is to have it pulled, a crude and agonizing procedure performed without anesthesia. You finish rinsing, and you turn your attention to food. Your stomach is empty, and you feel the familiar ache of hunger. Breakfast, if you have it, is simple and small. Most people eat 2 meals a day, one in the morning before work begins, and one in the evening after the day's labor is done. The content of these meals does not vary much. Bread and beer are the staples, the foundation of the Egyptian diet, consumed every day by everyone from the poorest farmer to the wealthiest noble. The bread is made from emmer wheat or barley, ancient grains that are hardier and more suited to Egyptian conditions than modern wheat varieties. The grain is ground into flour, a task that takes hours and is usually done by women, kneeling before a stone grinding slab and pushing a smaller stone back and forth across the grain, crushing it slowly into powder. The flour is mixed with water, sometimes with a bit of salt if available, shaped into flat loaves or round cakes, and baked in a clay oven or on a hot stone. The result is dense, heavy, and filling, but not particularly flavorful. The bread is dark, coarse, and dry, requiring effort to chew and swallow. You take a piece of yesterday's bread from a basket near the hearth. It has sat overnight, and it has become even harder, almost rock-like. You dip it into a cup of beer to soften it, and you chew slowly, working your jaw, your teeth grinding against the grit embedded in the bread. The beer is not like modern beer. It is thick, nutritious, and low in alcohol, made by partially baking barley bread, crumbling it into water, and allowing it to ferment for a day or two. The result is a cloudy, slightly sweet, slightly sour liquid that is full of yeast, grain particles, and nutrients. It is safer to drink than water because the brewing process involves boiling, which kills many of the harmful microorganisms, and because the alcohol, even at low levels, has some antibacterial properties. Everyone drinks beer. Adults drink it throughout the day. Children drink it. It is not consumed for intoxication, though stronger varieties exist for festivals and special occasions, but for hydration and nutrition. You drink your beer warm because there is no way to cool it, and it has a grainy texture that you have learned to tolerate. To a modern palate, it would be unappealing, strange, more like a liquid bread than a beverage. But to you, it is normal, necessary, and often the only safe thing to drink. Alongside your bread and beer, if you are fortunate, you might have an onion. Onions are cheap, plentiful, and they keep reasonably well. They are a dietary staple for the poor, eaten raw, roasted, or boiled. You peel back the dry outer layers, revealing the white, pungent flesh inside, and you bite into it, the sharp flavor a brief moment of intensity in an otherwise bland meal. Some days you might have a handful of dried dates, a few lentils left from last night's stew, or a small piece of dried fish if you live near the river and fishing is accessible. But these are extras, not guarantees. Most mornings, your meal is bread and beer and nothing more. As you eat, your family stirs around you. Your wife rises and tends to the fire, coaxing the embers back to life, adding a few sticks of wood or a handful of dried dung to get the flames going. Smoke fills the room immediately because there is no chimney, no proper ventilation except the door and the small openings near the roof. Your eyes water and you cough. This is normal. You breathe smoke every day, and over the years it damages your lungs, causes chronic respiratory problems, and contributes to a host of illnesses. But there is no alternative. Fire is necessary for cooking, for warmth during the cold nights, and for light when needed. Your children wake, rubbing their eyes, their small bodies thin and wiry. Children in ancient Egypt begin contributing to the household as soon as they are physically able, usually around the age of 5 or 6. There is no concept of childhood as a protected, carefree time. There are no toys except for simple objects, a ball made from rags, a doll fashioned from wood or clay. There is no school for the children of farmers and laborers. Education is reserved for the elite, for the sons of scribes and officials who will themselves become scribes. Your children will learn by watching and doing, by helping with chores, by working alongside you in the fields, and by gradually taking on more and more responsibility until they are, by their early teenage years, functioning as adults. Your youngest child, a girl of perhaps 4 years old, is naked. Young children often go without clothing because fabric is valuable and they grow quickly. She is thin, her belly slightly distended, a sign of malnutrition or perhaps of intestinal parasites. Her hair is shaved close to her scalp to prevent lice, and her skin is dark from the sun. She clings to her mother, still half asleep, and she will soon be given a small cup of beer and a piece of bread, and she will spend her day playing near the house, helping her mother with simple tasks, learning the skills she will need as a woman in this society. Your oldest son, nearly 10 years old, is already dressed in his simple linen kilt, ready to accompany you to the fields. He has been working alongside you for several years now, and he is learning the rhythms of agriculture, the techniques of planting and harvesting, the maintenance of tools, and the expectations of the overseers. He is quiet, serious beyond his years, because childhood here is brief and the responsibilities are heavy. You finish your meager breakfast and you stand. The sun is rising now, the light spilling over the eastern horizon, turning the sky from grey to gold. The heat is building. You know that in a few hours the temperature will be intense, the air shimmering, the ground radiating warmth. But work does not wait. The fields are calling. The overseers will be watching. The state's demands are constant and unyielding. You gather your tools, a simple hoe with a wooden handle and a bronze blade, a basket woven from reeds, a water jar fashioned from fired clay. You wrap a strip of linen around your head for some protection from the sun, though it will do little to shield you from the worst of the heat. You glance at your wife, who nods silently, understanding that she will manage the household while you are gone, that she will grind grain, prepare food, care for the younger children, haul water, and perform the 100 other tasks that fill her day. You glance at your son, and he falls into step beside you barefoot, his face already set in the resigned expression of someone who knows that the day ahead will be long, hot, and exhausting. Together, you step out into the narrow lane, joining the flow of other workers heading toward the fields. The village is fully awake now, a hive of activity, voices calling out, animals bleating and clucking, the sounds of life in all its messy, chaotic reality. You walk past your neighbors, some of whom you have known all your life, others who are newer to the village, families who have moved here seeking work or fleeing hardship elsewhere. You exchange brief nods, a few words, but there is no time for conversation. Everyone knows where they are going, everyone knows what must be done, and there is a shared, unspoken understanding that survival depends on labor, on meeting your obligations, on not attracting the wrong kind of attention from the overseers and officials who control every aspect of your life. You leave the village and walk along the narrow paths that wind between the fields. The landscape stretches out before you, flat and green where the crops are growing, brown and dusty where the irrigation has not yet reached, and beyond it all, the glimmer of water in the canals, and farther still, the desert, a wall of tawny emptiness that marks the edge of the world you know. The air is already thick with heat, and you can feel the sweat beginning to form on your skin, trickling down your back, soaking into the rough linen of your garment. You take a drink from your water jar, warm and stale, and you steel yourself for the day ahead. This is your morning. This is what it means to wake up in ancient Egypt's Middle Kingdom, and this is only the beginning. The real challenges, the true tests of endurance are still to come. Section 3. Water, Sanitation and Hygiene. Let's talk about water, because in the modern world, water is something we take utterly for granted. Turn on a tap, and clean, safe, often filtered and treated water flows out as much as you want, whenever you want it. Flush a toilet, and waste disappears into a vast, hidden infrastructure of sewers and treatment plants. Take a shower, and hot water cascades over you, washing away the day's grime. These conveniences are so fundamental to modern life that we rarely even think about them. But in ancient Egypt, in the Middle Kingdom, none of this exists. Water is precious, difficult to obtain, and almost always contaminated. Sanitation is primitive to non-existent, and hygiene, as we understand it, is a luxury that only the wealthiest can afford. The Nile is the source of all water in Egypt. It is the great river that makes life possible in a desert land, and everything revolves around it. But the Nile, for all its life-giving properties, is not clean. It is a working river, used for drinking, for irrigation, for washing, for transportation, and inevitably for waste disposal. People bathe in it if they bathe at all. Animals drink from it and defecate near it. Dead animals, and sometimes dead people, wash into it from upstream. The water carries silt, organic matter, bacteria, parasites, and a host of other contaminants. During the inundation, during Akhet when the river floods, the water spreads across the floodplain, mixing with everything it encounters, picking up even more material. When the flood recedes and the water is channeled into the network of irrigation canals and basins, it carries all of this with it. The canals themselves are open ditches, unlined, exposed to the sun, and they become breeding grounds for mosquitoes, snails that carry parasitic worms, and other vectors of disease. If you live in a village, your primary water source is likely one of these canals, or perhaps a pool or basin that has been dug to store water. You do not have access to the main channel of the Nile unless your village is directly on the riverbank, and even then, approaching the river can be dangerous because of crocodiles and hippos. So you rely on the secondary water sources, the canals and pools, and these are stagnant for much of the year, sitting in the sun, accumulating algae, insects, and filth. Every day, someone from your household, usually a woman or a child, must make multiple trips to the water source, carrying a pottery jar or a basket with smaller vessels. The jar is balanced on the head, a skill learned from childhood, and the walk might be a few hundred yards or it might be much farther, depending on where your house is in relation to the water. Each trip is exhausting in the heat, and each jar holds perhaps a gallon or two of water. For a household of 5 or 6 people, you need many gallons each day just for basic needs, and so the trips are endless, back and forth, all day long. When you reach the water source, you dip your jar beneath the surface, trying not to disturb too much sediment, but inevitably stirring up the mud at the bottom. You lift the jar, heavy now, and you begin the walk back, moving carefully, because spilling this precious water means another trip. By the time you get home, your shoulders ache, your neck is stiff, and you are drenched in sweat. The water you have collected sits in a large storage jar at your house, and over the course of the day, the sediment settles somewhat, but the water is never truly clear. You drink it, you cook with it, and you use it sparingly for washing, because you know how much effort it takes to get more. There is no boiling of drinking water, no concept of sterilization, no understanding that heating water could kill the organisms that cause illness. Boiling is done for cooking, for making beer, but not as a routine method of making water safe. As a result, everyone in your household, everyone in your village, is constantly exposed to waterborne pathogens. Diarrheal diseases are endemic. You might have mild diarrhea several times a month, accepted as normal, a brief inconvenience that passes. But periodically, you or someone in your family will develop severe dysentery, with bloody stools, cramping, fever, and dehydration that can be life-threatening, especially for children and the elderly. There is no rehydration therapy, no electrolyte solution, no intravenous fluids. You drink more water, you rest if you can afford to, and you hope your body can fight off the infection. Parasitic infections are even more insidious because they are chronic and cumulative. The most common is schistosomiasis, a disease caused by flatworms whose larvae live in freshwater snails. When you wade into a canal to collect water, to bathe, to wash clothes, or to work in the flooded fields, these microscopic larvae penetrate your skin, usually without you even feeling it. They enter your bloodstream and migrate to your bladder or intestines, where they mature into adult worms. The females lay eggs, and these eggs cause inflammation and damage to your organs. The symptoms develop slowly over months and years. You might notice blood in your urine, a condition so common in ancient Egypt that it was considered normal for boys going through puberty. You might have abdominal pain, fatigue, and a general sense of being unwell. But you don't connect these symptoms to the water you've been exposed to, because you don't know about parasites, about worms living inside you. You simply accept the discomfort as part of life. Other parasitic worms are also common. Tapeworms, which you contract from eating undercooked fish or meat, can grow to many feet in length inside your intestines. Round worms, hookworms, threadworms, all of these infest the population, and all of them cause malnutrition, anemia, and weakness because they consume the nutrients from the food you eat. You might pass visible worms in your stool, and you might try various herbal remedies in an attempt to expel them. But the reinfection rate is high because the environment is saturated with these parasites. Now let's talk about sanitation, because this is where the gap between ancient and modern becomes even more stark. You have already seen that there are no toilets in the modern sense. Human waste is managed, if that's the right word, in the most basic and unsanitary ways. In urban areas, in towns and small cities, some households have a small room or a corner designated for relieving oneself. There might be a wooden or ceramic pot, or there might be a simple seat built over a shallow pit. The waste accumulates, and periodically it must be emptied. This is a job that falls to women, children, or servants, and it is as unpleasant as it sounds. The waste is carried out in pots or baskets and dumped, usually into the nearest canal or waterway, or onto refuse heaps at the edge of the settlement. In rural areas, in small villages like yours, Even this minimal infrastructure doesn't exist. People simply go outside, find a spot away from the main paths, and squat in the dirt. Over time, certain areas become informal latrines, patches of ground that everyone uses, and these become fouled, reeking, and infested with flies. No one cleans them, no one maintains them. They just accumulate until the smell and the disease force people to shift to a new spot. The result is that human feces is everywhere in the environment. It dries in the sun, turns to dust, and is blown by the wind. It contaminates the soil, the water sources, the fields where food is grown. Flies land on it, pick up bacteria and parasite eggs on their legs and bodies, and then land on food, on cooking surfaces, on people's faces and hands. This is one of the primary reasons why gastrointestinal diseases, eye infections, and other illnesses are so prevalent. The lack of sanitation creates a cycle of contamination and reinfection that is nearly impossible to break without an understanding of hygiene and public health. Human waste is not the only problem. Animal waste is everywhere as well. Livestock, goats, sheep, cattle, donkeys, they live in close proximity to people, often inside the same compound or even the same dwelling. They defecate freely and no one cleans it up regularly. The dung dries, hardens, and is collected for use as fuel, but fresh droppings are everywhere underfoot. Chickens peck in the dirt, leaving their droppings scattered. Dogs roam the streets, scavenging and defecating. The combined smell of human and animal waste is a constant background odor in any settlement, and you have become so accustomed to it that you barely notice it anymore. Bathing, as mentioned earlier, is not a regular practice for most people. Water is too precious, and the effort required to haul enough water for a full bath is prohibitive. Wealthier people, those who have servants to carry water for them, might bathe more frequently, perhaps once a week or even more often. They might use a simple shower arrangement, where a servant pours water over them from a jug, or they might immerse themselves in a large basin. They might use natron, a naturally occurring salt, as a primitive soap, scrubbing their skin to remove some of the grime. But for you, bathing is a rare luxury. You might, once a month, or even less often, take yourself to the canal and wade in, rinsing off the worst of the dirt and sweat. But this exposes you to the very parasites and bacteria we've been discussing. You might rinse your hands and face more frequently, using small amounts of water from your storage jar, but a full body wash is simply not practical. Instead, you live with the grime. Your skin is covered in a layer of dust, sweat, and dead skin cells. Your hair, if you have it, is oily and matted. Many people shave their heads, both men and women, to reduce the problem of head lice and to stay cooler in the heat. Lice are ubiquitous. They spread easily in close living quarters, jumping from person to person, biting, causing intense itching, and spreading diseases like typhus. Shaving your head removes their habitat, but it does not eliminate them entirely, because they can also live in clothing and bedding. Body odor is universal and unmasked. There is no deodorant, no perfume except for the elite who can afford imported oils and scents. Everyone smells of sweat, of smoke, of the work they do. A farmer smells of earth and animals. A fisherman smells of fish and river mud. A potter smells of wet clay. You become accustomed to these smells, just as you have become accustomed to the smell of waste and smoke, but to a modern person, the olfactory assault would be overwhelming. Women face additional challenges. Menstruation is managed with rags, folded linen cloths that are washed and reused, though washing is infrequent and water is limited. There are no sanitary products, no understanding of hygiene in this context. Menstrual blood is seen as ritually impure in some contexts, and women might be excluded from certain activities during their periods, but practical accommodations are minimal. You simply manage as best you can, and you endure the discomfort, the mess, and the social stigma. Childbirth is another area where the lack of hygiene has deadly consequences. When a woman goes into labor, she is attended by a midwife, an older woman with practical experience but no medical training in the modern sense. The birth takes place at home, in the same room where the family sleeps and eats, with no sterile instruments, no clean environment, no antibiotics to prevent infection. The midwife's hands are not washed in any meaningful way. The tools she uses, if any, are not sterilized. The linen cloths used to wrap the baby are not necessarily clean. If the birth is uncomplicated, mother and baby might be fine. But if there are complications, if there is tearing, if the placenta does not deliver properly, if there is excessive bleeding, the risk of infection is enormous. Puerperal fever, infection of the uterus after childbirth, is a common killer of women. The symptoms develop in the days following birth: fever, chills, foul-smelling discharge, abdominal pain, and without antibiotics, the infection spreads, causes sepsis, and often leads to death. Many women die this way, and many babies are born only to lose their mothers within a week. Even for those who survive, the recovery period is difficult. There is no postnatal care, no rest period where someone else takes over the work. A woman is expected to resume her duties as soon as she is physically able, carrying water, grinding grain, caring for her other children, all while her body is still healing from the trauma of birth. For a modern person, someone accustomed to clean tap water, indoor plumbing, daily showers, soap, shampoo, toothpaste, and all the infrastructure of modern hygiene, dropping into this world would be an immediate and profound shock. Within hours, you would be desperately thirsty, but afraid to drink the water you're given. You would need to relieve yourself, but the options available would be deeply distressing. You would want to wash your hands, but clean water and soap don't exist. You would crave the cleanliness you've always taken for granted, and you would find none of it. Your modern immune system, never exposed to the specific pathogens that thrive in this environment, would be under immediate assault. The contaminated water alone would likely give you severe gastroenteritis within a day or two. You would experience cramping, diarrhea, vomiting, and dehydration. Without modern medical care, without IV fluids and antibiotics, your condition could deteriorate rapidly. The parasites would begin their slow work, entering your body through your skin, through the water you drink, through the food you eat, and you would have no way to detect them or to stop them. The lack of sanitation would expose you to diseases that have been virtually eliminated in the developed world. Cholera, typhoid, hepatitis, all spread through fecal contamination of water, would be constant risks. The flies that land on your food have just come from human waste. The water you drink has been sitting in an open canal where people have bathed, washed, and defecated upstream. The ground you walk on barefoot is contaminated with both human and animal waste. Every surface, every object, every interaction carries the potential for infection. You would realize, perhaps within a single day, that the simple, basic foundation of health, clean water and sanitation, is absent. And you would understand that this single factor alone could kill you, regardless of anything else you do to try to survive. This is the reality of water, sanitation, and hygiene in ancient Egypt's Middle Kingdom. This is what every person lived with, every day, for their entire lives. And this is one of the primary reasons why life expectancy was short, why infant mortality was high, and why disease was an ever-present companion from birth to death. Section 4. Food, Diet, and Nutrition. Now let's turn to food, because this is another area where the distance between modern life and ancient Egyptian life is vast and profound. In the developed world today, most people have access to an abundance and variety of food that would have been unimaginable to an ancient Egyptian. Supermarkets overflow with produce from around the world, with meats and dairy and grains and processed foods and sweets and beverages of every description. Refrigeration keeps food fresh. Preservatives extend shelf life. Supply chains operate with such efficiency that most people never experience true scarcity. We worry about having too much food, about obesity and overconsumption, not about having too little. In ancient Egypt, in the Middle Kingdom, the situation is reversed entirely. Food is scarce, monotonous, and for most people, barely adequate to sustain life. The vast majority of the population exists on the edge of malnutrition, getting just enough calories to work, but rarely experiencing true abundance or variety. Your diet is determined by what can be grown in the Nile Valley, by what the state allows you to keep after taxes, and by your position in the social hierarchy. And for an ordinary farmer or laborer, the diet is restricted, repetitive, and nutritionally deficient in ways that slowly undermine your health. Let's start with the staples, bread and beer, because these are the foundation of every meal, every day, for everyone. Bread in ancient Egypt is not the soft, fluffy, white bread that most modern people are familiar with. It is made from emmer wheat or barley, ancient grain varieties that are tougher, more nutritious, but also coarser than modern wheat. The grain is harvested, threshed, and winnowed, then stored in large pottery jars or in granaries. When you need flour, you or someone in your household must grind the grain, and this is one of the most time-consuming and physically demanding tasks in the daily routine. Grinding is done using a saddle quern, a large, flat stone set at a slight angle, with a smaller stone that you push back and forth across the grain. You kneel on the ground, bent forward, and you work the grinding stone with your arms and shoulders, crushing the grain bit by bit. The work is rhythmic but exhausting. Your back aches from the bent position. Your knees hurt from kneeling on the hard ground. Your arms and shoulders burn from the repetitive motion, and the process is slow. It takes hours to grind enough flour for a day's worth of bread for a family. The flour that results is coarse and full of grit. The grinding stones themselves wear down during the process, shedding tiny particles of stone that mix with the flour. There is no way to remove these particles, no sifting fine enough to catch them all. So when the flour is mixed with water and baked into bread, these stone particles remain, and when you eat the bread, you chew on sand and grit with every bite. Over the years, over a lifetime of eating this bread, the abrasive particles wear down your teeth, grinding away the enamel, exposing the softer inner layers, creating cracks and weak points where decay can take hold. By the time you reach your 30s, your teeth are visibly worn, the surfaces flattened, the cusps ground away. By your 40s, many of your teeth are broken, decayed, or missing entirely. Dental abscesses are common, painful infections in the jaw that cause swelling, fever, and if untreated, can spread to the bloodstream and kill you. There is no effective dental care. A tooth that causes unbearable pain might be pulled by someone with strong hands and crude tools, a procedure done without anesthesia, with you held down while the tooth is wrenched from your jaw. Many people simply live with the pain because the alternative is worse. The bread itself is baked in a variety of forms. Flat loaves, round cakes, sometimes shaped into cones or molded in ceramic forms. The baking is done in simple clay ovens, heated with wood or dried dung, or sometimes the dough is simply placed on a hot stone. The bread is dense and heavy, with a coarse texture and a slightly sour taste from natural fermentation. It fills your stomach, provides calories, but offers little in the way of pleasure. You eat it because you must, because it is what you have, and because without it, you would starve. Beer, as we've discussed, is the universal beverage. It is made by partially baking barley bread, breaking it into pieces, adding water and dates or other sweeteners if available, and allowing the mixture to ferment. The result is a thick, nutritious liquid, low in alcohol, perhaps 2 to 4%, but rich in calories, vitamins, and minerals. It is cloudy, full of sediment, with a grainy texture and a taste that is both sweet and slightly sour. You drink it throughout the day, adults and children alike, because it is safer than water and because it provides sustenance. Different qualities of beer exist. The finest beer, made from wheat and carefully filtered, is reserved for the elite, for temple offerings, and for special occasions. The beer you drink is rougher, made from barley unfiltered, with chunks of bread still floating in it. You might strain it through a cloth before drinking, or you might drink it as it is, chewing the solids, swallowing the liquid. It is not refreshing in the way a cold modern beverage is. It is warm, thick, and filling, more like liquid food than a drink. But it is essential, and you consume several cups of it each day. Beyond bread and beer, your diet depends on what else is available, and for most people the options are limited. Onions are the most common vegetable, grown widely, stored well, and eaten at nearly every meal. You eat them raw, the sharp, pungent flavor a welcome break from the blandness of bread. You eat them roasted, their flavor mellowing, their texture softening. You eat them boiled in stews, adding body and a bit of nutrition. Onions are so central to the diet that they are mentioned in tomb inscriptions as essential offerings for the dead, provisions needed for the afterlife. Other vegetables are seasonal and less reliable. Lettuce, cucumbers, leeks, garlic, radishes, and various leafy greens grow in Egyptian gardens and fields, but they are available only at certain times of the year. When they are in season, you eat them fresh, a rare moment of variety and freshness in your diet. But they do not keep. Within days of harvest, they wilt, rot, and become inedible in the heat. There is no refrigeration, no canning, no freezing. So for much of the year, fresh vegetables are simply not available, and you live on stored grains, dried legumes, and preserved foods. Legumes, particularly lentils, chickpeas, and fava beans, are important sources of protein. They can be dried and stored for months, and when cooked, they provide bulk and nutrition. A typical evening meal might be a stew of lentils boiled with water, onions, and a little oil if you have any, eaten with bread and washed down with beer. It is simple, repetitive, and while it keeps you alive, it is not satisfying in the way a varied, flavorful meal is. You eat the same thing day after day, week after week, until the monotony becomes a kind of background condition, barely noticed because you have never known anything different. Meat is a luxury, rare and reserved for special occasions. The wealthy eat meat regularly: beef, goat, mutton, pork, duck, and goose, prepared in a variety of ways and flavored with imported spices and honey. But for you, meat is something you might taste a few times a year during festivals, at weddings or funerals, or when an animal dies and the community shares the carcass before it spoils. When you do eat meat, it is a moment of genuine pleasure, a taste and texture that your body craves because it is so rare. Fish is more accessible, especially if you live near the river or in the delta. Fishing is a significant activity, and fish are caught using nets, hooks, traps, and spears. Fresh fish, when available, is a welcome addition to the diet, grilled over a fire or boiled in water. But fish spoils quickly in the heat, within hours if not eaten or preserved immediately. So most fish is dried or salted, transforming it into a hard, pungent product that keeps for months, but is tough, salty, and strong-tasting. You soak it in water to soften it before eating, and you consume it in small amounts, more as a flavoring than as a main dish. Dairy products exist, but are not a major part of the diet for most people. Some households keep a goat, which provides milk. Fresh milk is drunk when available, though it sours quickly in the heat. More commonly, milk is made into cheese, a simple, salty product that keeps better than fresh milk but is still prone to spoiling. Cow's milk is rare, because cattle are expensive and owned primarily by temples and large estates. For most people, dairy is an occasional treat, not a daily staple. Fruit is another luxury. Dates, figs, and grapes grow in Egypt, and they are sweet, nutritious, and highly valued. Dates especially are important, used to sweeten beer, eaten as snacks, and pressed into cakes that can be stored. But fruit is taxed heavily, often claimed by the state or by landowners, and what remains for ordinary people is minimal. You might get a handful of dates during the harvest season or a few dried figs, but fresh fruit, abundant and varied, is not part of your experience. Honey is the only sweetener available, and it is precious. Beekeeping is practiced, and honey is used in medicine, in religious offerings, and occasionally in food for the wealthy. For you, honey is something you taste perhaps once a year during a special festival or celebration, a moment of intense sweetness that you remember for months afterward. Sugar, as we know it, does not exist. The concept of dessert, of sweet treats, of candy and cakes, is foreign to your world. Fats and oils are also limited. Olive oil is rare in Egypt because olive trees do not grow well in the climate. Instead, oils are rendered from sesame seeds, from linseed, or from animal fat. These oils are used sparingly in cooking, more for lubrication than for flavor, because they are valuable and must be conserved. The overall result of this diet is chronic malnutrition. You get enough calories, most of the time, to fuel the labor you do, but you do not get the range of vitamins, minerals, and nutrients that a human body needs for optimal health. Vitamin deficiencies are common and cause a range of problems that go unrecognized and untreated. Vitamin C deficiency causes scurvy, leading to bleeding gums, loosening teeth, joint pain, and slow wound healing. Fresh fruits and vegetables, the primary sources of vitamin C, are seasonal and scarce. So many people develop mild scurvy during the long months when fresh produce is not available. Your gums bleed when you chew, your teeth loosen in their sockets, and you accept this as normal because everyone around you experiences the same. Vitamin A deficiency causes night blindness, making it difficult or impossible to see in low light. This is dangerous in a world without artificial lighting, where navigating after dark means stumbling through darkness lit only by stars and moon. Vitamin A also supports immune function, so deficiency makes you more vulnerable to infections. The sources of vitamin A, liver, dairy, eggs, orange and yellow vegetables, are rarely available to you. Iron deficiency causes anemia, leaving you weak, tired, and short of breath. Women are especially vulnerable because of blood loss during menstruation and childbirth. The pale, exhausted appearance of many women is partly a result of chronic anemia. Iron-rich foods, red meat, liver, are luxuries you rarely eat. You exist in a state of constant, low-level fatigue that you cannot explain and cannot escape. Calcium deficiency weakens bones and teeth, making fractures more likely and healing slower. Dairy products, the primary source of calcium, are not a regular part of your diet, and the result is that your bones are more fragile than they should be. A fall that might cause a bruise in a well-nourished person can cause a fracture in you, and fractures, without proper medical care, can lead to chronic disability or death from infection. Children are the most vulnerable to malnutrition. Their growing bodies need more nutrients, but they eat the same limited diet as adults, and often they eat less because food is rationed carefully. Stunted growth is common. Children are smaller, thinner, and developmentally delayed compared to modern children of the same age. Their immune systems are weakened, making them susceptible to every illness that comes through the village. Infant and child mortality is shockingly high, with perhaps half of all children dying before the age of 5. The causes vary: infections, diarrheal diseases, malnutrition, but the underlying factor is often inadequate nutrition that leaves their bodies unable to fight off illness. For a modern person, accustomed to 3 varied meals a day, to snacks, to fresh fruits and vegetables year-round, to meat and dairy as staples, to vitamins and supplements, to the ability to walk into a store and buy almost any food imaginable, the Egyptian diet would be a shock. Within days, you would feel the monotony, the blandness, the lack of satisfaction. Within weeks, you would feel the deficiencies, the fatigue, the weakness, the sense that your body is not getting what it needs. Your modern palate, used to salt, sugar, fat, and flavor in abundance, would revolt against bread and onions and warm, grainy beer. You would crave variety, crave sweetness, crave the foods that comfort and satisfy you. And you would find none of it. You would eat to survive mechanically, joylessly, and you would realize that food in this world is not pleasure or comfort. It is simply fuel, barely adequate, carefully rationed, and always, always at the mercy of forces beyond your control. A bad flood, a poor harvest, a plague of locusts, and suddenly even this inadequate diet disappears, replaced by famine, by hunger, by watching children waste away while there is nothing you can do. This is the reality of food, diet, and nutrition in ancient Egypt's Middle Kingdom. This is what sustained millions of people for centuries, what allowed them to work, to build, to create a civilization. But it is also what limited their lives, shortened their lifespans, and ensured that most people lived in a state of constant, grinding deprivation that we can barely comprehend from our position of abundance. Section 5. Clothing and physical discomfort. Let's talk now about what you wear, or more accurately, what little you wear, and how the combination of climate, materials, and the nature of ancient Egyptian clothing would add yet another layer of discomfort to your daily existence. In the modern world, clothing is abundant, varied, and designed for comfort, protection, and style. We have closets full of options, garments made from a dizzying array of fabrics, engineered for specific purposes, weather-appropriate, frequently washed, and easily replaced. In ancient Egypt, particularly for ordinary people, clothing is minimal, repetitive, and often inadequate for the conditions you face. The primary fabric in ancient Egypt is linen, made from the flax plant. Flax grows well in Egypt, and linen production is one of the major industries, employing thousands of workers, mostly women, in the labor-intensive process of turning flax stems into thread and thread into cloth. The process begins with harvesting the flax at just the right stage of maturity, pulling the plants up by the roots rather than cutting them to preserve the full length of the fibers. The stems are then retted, soaked in water for days or weeks until the woody outer layers rot away and the inner fibers can be separated. The fibers are then beaten, combed, and spun into thread using a simple spindle, a stick weighted at one end that allows the spinner to twist the fibers into a continuous strand. The thread is then woven on a loom, either a horizontal ground loom where the weaver sits on the floor or a vertical loom that stands upright. Weaving is skilled work, and the quality of the finished cloth depends on the fineness of the thread, the tightness of the weave, and the skill of the weaver. The finest linen, called royal linen or mummy linen, is woven so tightly and from such fine thread that it is almost transparent, soft as silk, and light as air. This quality of linen is reserved for the elite, for the pharaoh, for high officials, for wrapping the bodies of the wealthy dead. What you wear is at the opposite end of the spectrum. Your linen is coarse, woven from thick thread with a loose, rough texture. It is stiff when new, scratchy against your skin, and it takes weeks of wear and washing before it softens even slightly. The cloth is undyed, a natural off-white or beige color, because dyes are expensive and dyeing is a specialized skill. Colored clothing, especially in bright reds, blues, and greens, is a luxury that signals wealth and status, and it is not for you. For men, the standard garment is a kilt, a rectangular piece of linen wrapped around the waist and tied or tucked in place. It extends from the waist to the knees or mid-thigh, and that is all. No shirt, no undergarments, no socks, no shoes in most cases. Your upper body is bare, exposed to the sun, to insects, to the scratches and scrapes of daily work. If you are doing heavy labor, particularly in the heat of Shemu, you might wear even less, just a loincloth, a narrow strip of linen wrapped between the legs and around the waist, or you might work entirely naked, because clothing, even minimal clothing, becomes unbearably hot and restrictive when you are engaged in physical labor under the blazing sun. For women, the typical garment is a sheath dress, a simple tube of linen that goes from just below the breasts to the ankles, held up by two shoulder straps. It is fitted, not because fashion demands it, but because fabric is expensive and every inch must be used efficiently. The dress is plain, unadorned, and made from the same coarse linen as men's kilts. Like men, women do not wear undergarments. The dress is all you have, worn directly against your skin, absorbing your sweat, becoming soiled, and rarely washed because washing is difficult and the cloth deteriorates with each washing. You own very little clothing, perhaps 2 garments total, one to wear while the other is being washed, if it ever is. Laundry is an arduous task that requires water, effort, and time, all of which are in short supply. Clothes are washed by soaking them in water, beating them on rocks, or scrubbing them with natron, the natural salt used for many purposes, including cleaning. There is no soap in the modern sense, no detergent, no effective way to remove deep stains or odors. After washing, the garment is wrung out and hung in the sun to dry, which happens quickly in the dry heat, but the fabric never really gets clean. Sweat, body oils, dirt, and smoke accumulate over time, giving your clothing a permanent grime and a distinctive odor. Because fabric is valuable, clothing is patched and repaired repeatedly. When a tear develops, you stitch it closed with thread or cover it with a patch of scrap fabric. When the fabric becomes so worn that it can no longer be repaired, it is repurposed, torn into strips for bandages, used as rags, or incorporated into new garments. Nothing is wasted. The idea of throwing away clothing because it is out of style or because you are bored with it is unthinkable. You wear what you have until it literally falls apart, and then you make do with less. Footwear is another luxury that most people cannot afford or do not use regularly. Sandals exist, made from woven papyrus reeds, palm fiber, or leather. They are simple, flat, with a strap that goes between the toes and around the ankle. They provide minimal protection and no support, and they wear out quickly on rough ground. Most people go barefoot most of the time, because sandals are too precious to wear for everyday labor, and because working barefoot is simply more practical when you are wading through mud, walking in wet fields, or climbing over rocks. Going barefoot has consequences. Your feet become tough, the soles calloused and thick, but this does not protect you from everything. You step on thorns, on sharp stones, on broken pottery, on hot sand that burns your skin. You get cuts and scrapes that become infected. You develop thick, cracked skin on your heels and between your toes. In the wet season, during and after the flood, you walk through mud, through water contaminated with parasites, and the larvae of schistosomiasis and other worms penetrate your skin and enter your bloodstream. Your feet are a constant source of minor injuries, infections, and chronic pain, and there is nothing you can do except endure. The heat is another constant challenge. During Shemu, the harvest season that stretches from March through May, daytime temperatures regularly exceed 100 degrees Fahrenheit and can climb as high as 110 or 115 in the worst of summer. There is no air conditioning, no fans, no way to cool yourself except by seeking shade, which is scarce, or by wetting your clothing, which provides brief relief as it evaporates but uses precious water. You work in this heat, hour after hour, and the sun beats down on your bare skin, your exposed arms, chest, back, and head. Sunburn is inevitable, especially early in the season before your skin has darkened and toughened. Your skin becomes deeply tanned, almost leathery, prematurely aged by years of ultraviolet exposure. There is no sunscreen, no protective clothing beyond a simple headcloth, a strip of linen wrapped around your head to provide minimal shade for your face and neck. Heatstroke is a real and present danger. If you push yourself too hard, if you do not drink enough, if you work through the hottest part of the day without rest, your body's cooling system can fail. You become dizzy, disoriented, your skin hot and dry because you have stopped sweating. Without intervention, without being moved to shade, cooled with water, given fluids, you can collapse, lose consciousness, and die. Every year, workers die from heat during Shemu, and their deaths are accepted as tragic but inevitable, a risk of the season and the work. At night, particularly during the winter months and in the hours before dawn, the temperature drops significantly. The desert surrounding the Nile Valley radiates heat away quickly once the sun sets, and without the moderating effect of humidity, the air becomes cold, sometimes dropping into the 40s or 50s Fahrenheit. You have no heating, no warm blankets beyond a single piece of rough wool if you are fortunate. You huddle together with your family for warmth, bodies pressed close, and you shiver through the cold hours until the sun rises and the heat begins to build again. The combination of extreme heat during the day and cold at night, of working in brutal sun with minimal clothing, of going barefoot over rough ground, of wearing the same garment day after day without proper washing, creates a level of physical discomfort that is constant and inescapable. Your skin itches from the coarse linen, from the dust and sweat that accumulates under your clothing. You itch from insect bites, from lice that live in your clothing and hair, from mites and fleas that infest your sleeping mat. Lice are universal. They spread easily in close quarters, jumping from person to person, laying their eggs in the seams of clothing and in hair. Head lice bite your scalp, causing intense itching and sometimes secondary infections when you scratch too hard. Body lice live in clothing and bite your skin, leaving red welts and causing constant irritation. Pubic lice infest the groin area, equally irritating and impossible to eliminate without access to effective treatments, which do not exist. Many Egyptians, both men and women, shave their heads as a practical measure against lice and to stay cooler. A shaved head is easier to keep clean, or at least cleaner than long hair, and it reduces the habitat for lice. But shaving must be done regularly with bronze razors, which are expensive and dull quickly, or with sharpened flint blades, which are crude and prone to causing nicks and cuts. Many people simply keep their hair very short, cropped close to the scalp with scissors or shears, a compromise between practicality and the effort required for full shaving. Wealthier people, who do not have to work in the fields, wear wigs made from human hair or plant fibers. These wigs are elaborate, heavy and hot, styled in complex braids, curls and layers, dyed black or adorned with beads and ornaments. They are status symbols, visible markers of wealth and leisure, and they are uncomfortable in the heat, but they serve a social function that outweighs the discomfort. For you, a laborer, a wig is out of the question. You have a shaved or closely cropped head, and you wrap a cloth around it when the sun is particularly brutal, and that is the extent of your protection. For a modern person, used to a wardrobe full of clean, comfortable, seasonally appropriate clothing, to daily showers and fresh garments, to shoes designed for support and protection, to climate-controlled environments that moderate temperature, the experience of wearing ancient Egyptian clothing would be profoundly uncomfortable. Within hours, you would feel the scratchiness of the coarse linen, the exposure of bare skin to sun and insects, the heat trapped against your body. Within days, your feet would be blistered and cut from walking barefoot, your skin would be sunburned and itching, and you would be desperate for a change of clothes, for something clean, for relief from the constant physical irritation. You would realize that clothing in this world is not comfort or self-expression. It is minimal protection, barely adequate, worn until it disintegrates, and doing little to shield you from the harshness of the environment. And you would understand that physical comfort, the simple pleasure of feeling clean, cool, and well-dressed, is a luxury that you have taken for granted every day of your modern life, and that here, in ancient Egypt, it simply does not exist for people like you. Section 6. Labor and Daily Work. Now we come to the heart of daily life in ancient Egypt's Middle Kingdom, the work that defines your existence, that occupies the vast majority of your waking hours, and that slowly, inexorably, breaks down your body over the years. In the modern developed world, work is often something we do for a set number of hours, after which we return to our homes, to leisure time, to rest and recreation. Labor laws protect workers from excessive hours, unsafe conditions, and exploitation. We have weekends, vacation time, sick leave, and retirement. We have a concept of work-life balance, of the importance of rest, of the right to pursue our own interests outside of work. None of this exists in ancient Egypt. Work is not something you do for part of your day. It is your day. It is your life. You work from dawn until dusk, 6 days a week, every week, for your entire life, with only festival days and the periods when the flood makes field work impossible offering any break. And even during those breaks, you are not resting. You are being conscripted by the state for corvée labor, organized work gangs engaged in building projects, canal digging, quarrying, transportation, and military service. If you are a farmer, which is the case for roughly 80 to 90% of the population, your work follows the rhythm of the seasons, the cycle of Akhit, Peret, and Shemu that we have already discussed. During Peret, the growing season, you plant your crops, working the fields that have been assigned to you, preparing the soil, sowing seeds, managing irrigation, and weeding constantly to protect the young plants. This work is physical, repetitive, and done entirely with hand tools and animal power if you are fortunate enough to have access to oxen. The plough, if you can use one, is a simple wooden implement with a bronze or sometimes stone blade, pulled by a pair of oxen. The plough breaks up the soil, creates furrows for planting, but it is not efficient by modern standards. It requires constant guidance, constant adjustment, and it is exhausting for both the animals and the person controlling them. Most small farmers do not own oxen. Oxen are expensive, require feeding and care, and are owned by wealthy landowners, temples, or the state. You might have access to oxen during peak planting times, but you pay for that access with a share of your harvest, with additional labor obligations, or with other forms of tribute. More commonly, you work the soil with a hoe, a simple tool with a wooden handle and a bronze or stone blade, swinging it over and over, chopping at the earth, breaking up clods, digging channels for water. This is backbreaking work in the most literal sense. You bend forward, swing the hoe, strike the ground, lift, repeat, hour after hour, day after day. Your back screams in protest, your shoulders ache, your hands blister and then callous, and the work never ends because the fields are large and your tools are primitive. Irrigation is another constant task. The basin system that Egypt relies on requires careful management. Water must be let into the fields at the right times, allowed to stand for the right duration, and then drained away. Channels must be maintained, dikes repaired, and water must often be lifted from lower canals to higher fields using the shaduf. The shaduf is a lever system, a long pole balanced on a vertical post, with a bucket on one end and a counterweight, usually a large stone, on the other end. You lower the bucket into the canal, let it fill with water, and then the counterweight helps you lift it back up, swinging it over to pour the water into a higher channel or basin. This is repetitive, mind-numbing work. You perform the same motion hundreds of times a day, your muscles burning, your mind empty because there is no mental stimulation, no variety, just the endless rhythm of lower, fill, lift, pour, lower, fill, lift, pour. The sun beats down, the water splashes, mosquitoes swarm around the canal, and you work on because the crops need water and the alternative is crop failure and famine. Weeding is another essential task, and perhaps the most tedious of all. You move slowly through the fields, bent over, identifying and pulling out unwanted plants that compete with your crops for water, nutrients, and light. You work row by row, section by section, your back bent, your hands in the dirt, pulling, tossing weeds aside, moving forward, pulling again. The heat is intense, the position is agonizing, and the work seems endless because weeds grow constantly, as fast as you can remove them. When harvest time comes, during Shemu, the pace intensifies. The grain has ripened, and it must be cut quickly before it becomes overripe, before the seeds shatter and fall to the ground, before wind or pests can damage the crop. You work with a sickle, a curved blade of bronze or sometimes flint, set into a wooden handle. You move through the field, grasping handfuls of stalks with one hand, cutting them near the base with the sickle, binding them into sheaves with rope or twisted straw. The work is frantic, urgent, because timing is everything. Too early and the grain is not fully ripe. Too late and you lose part of the harvest. The stalks are rough, scratchy against your bare arms and chest. The sickle is sharp, and accidents happen. You cut your hand, slice your arm, and you bind the wound with a strip of cloth and continue working because stopping is not an option. The heat during Shemu is at its peak, often above 100 degrees, and you work through it, pausing only briefly for water and a piece of bread at midday, driven by necessity and by the knowledge that overseers are watching, that the state is counting, that your survival depends on bringing in this harvest. Once the grain is cut, it must be threshed to separate the seeds from the stalks. This is done on a threshing floor, a flat, hard surface of packed earth or stone. The sheaves are spread out, and animals, usually oxen or donkeys, are driven over them, walking in circles, trampling the grain loose. You guide the animals, rearrange the stalks, work in the dust and chaff that fills the air, coughing, your eyes watering, your throat raw. Then comes winnowing, the process of separating the grain from the chaff. You use a wooden scoop or a flat basket, tossing the mixture into the air so that the wind blows away the lighter chaff and the heavier seeds fall back down into a pile. This is skilled work, requiring judgment and timing, and it must be done when the wind is right. You work hour after hour, tossing, collecting, tossing again, until finally you have clean grain, ready to be measured and stored. And then comes the moment you dread most, the tax assessment. Officials arrive with their measuring rods and their scribes with their writing implements. They measure your grain, calculate the amount, and take the state's share, which can be as much as a third to half of what you have grown. The assessment is not negotiable. You do not argue, because arguing with a scribe or an official is dangerous. They have the power to assess you higher, to claim you have hidden grain, to accuse you of cheating, and the punishments for such accusations are severe. If you are suspected of holding back grain, you can be beaten. Beatings are a standard form of enforcement and punishment in ancient Egypt. Officials carry sticks, simple wooden rods, and they use them freely. You might be struck across the back, the legs, the shoulders, hard enough to leave bruises and welts, hard enough to break skin, hard enough to ensure you never consider defying the system again. You might be imprisoned, held in a small cell or pit until you agree to surrender what is demanded, or until your family can pay a fine, or until the official decides you have suffered enough. The grain that remains after the state takes its share must feed your family for an entire year. You store it carefully in pottery jars sealed with mud, stacked in a corner of your house, or in a small granary if you have one. You ration it out day by day, meal by meal, always aware that if something goes wrong, if the next flood is poor, if pests get into your stores, if illness prevents you from working and earning or growing more, you could run out months before the next harvest, and then you face hunger, debt, and potential ruin. Beyond agricultural work, there is corvée labor, state-organized conscription of workers for public projects. Every able-bodied man owes a certain amount of labor to the state each year, typically during Akhit when the fields are flooded and agricultural work is impossible. The state mobilizes these workers for a variety of tasks: digging and maintaining canals, building and repairing dikes, quarrying stone, transporting materials, constructing temples, tombs, fortresses, and participating in military expeditions. Corvée service is obligatory. You cannot refuse. Your name is recorded by scribes who travel through the villages conducting censuses, assessing the population, tracking who owes service and when. When your name is called, you report to the designated location, you are assigned to a work gang, and you labor under the supervision of overseers, often for weeks or even months at a time. The work is hard, often dangerous, and always exhausting. If you are sent to a quarry, you spend your days cutting stone with copper chisels and wooden mallets, pounding away at the rock face in the brutal heat, breathing dust, risking injury from falling stones or from accidents with tools. Quarries are noisy, chaotic places, filled with the sound of hammers striking stone, of men shouting orders, of blocks being dragged and levered into position. The work is measured by quotas, by the number of blocks that must be cut each day, and failure to meet the quota can result in punishment. If you are sent to a canal digging project, you spend your days moving earth with baskets, shovels, and your bare hands, excavating channels, reinforcing banks, working in muddy water under the sun. The work is monotonous, repetitive, and backbreaking. You fill a basket with earth, carry it up out of the trench, dump it, return, fill again, repeat, thousands of times each day. Your muscles ache, your skin burns, and you are surrounded by thousands of other workers doing the same thing. A vast, coordinated effort that transforms the landscape, but grinds down the individuals involved. If you are conscripted for a building project, you might be hauling massive stone blocks on wooden sledges, dragging them across the sand with ropes, dozens or hundreds of men pulling together, moving slowly, stopping and starting, straining against the weight. Or you might be carrying mud bricks, thousands of them, from the brick yards to the construction site, stacking them, mortar them, building walls, temples, fortresses, structures that will stand for centuries, but that you will never see completed because your service will end, and you will return to your village long before the project is finished. And if you are unlucky, you might be conscripted for military service, sent south to the fortresses in Nubia or east to the Sinai, or to wherever the state needs soldiers. Military service during the Middle Kingdom is not glorious. You are not a trained warrior. You are a farmer with a spear, a club, or a bow, sent to garrison a remote fortress, to march through hostile territory, to fight if ordered, and to die if necessary. The fortresses in Nubia, built by Senusret III and his predecessors, are massive, impressive structures, but they are also isolated, dangerous postings where disease, conflict with local populations, and the harsh environment take a steady toll on the garrisons. For women, the work is different but no less demanding. You do not work in the fields, typically, unless the need is desperate and every hand is required. Instead, your labor is domestic, but domestic labor in ancient Egypt is grueling and unending. You grind grain, which, as we have discussed, takes hours each day. You bake bread, brew beer, cook meals, haul water, care for children, spin thread, weave cloth, make clothing, clean the house, and perform 100 other tasks that keep the household functioning. There is no running water, No stove, no washing machine, no refrigerator, no modern appliances to ease any of this work. Everything is done by hand, with simple tools, and it requires constant physical effort. You kneel to grind grain, your back bent, your arms working the grinding stone for hours. You squat by the fire to tend the cooking, the heat radiating into your face, the smoke stinging your eyes. You carry water jars on your head or shoulder, walking back and forth from the canal, trip after trip, the weight pressing down on your neck and spine. And on top of all this domestic work, you are expected to bear and raise children, which is your primary social role and obligation. Pregnancy and childbirth, as we have discussed, are dangerous, and the recovery time is minimal. You are expected to resume your duties as soon as you are physically able, nursing an infant while still grinding grain, cooking, hauling water, caring for other children. For a modern person, accustomed to an 8-hour workday, to weekends, to vacation time, to labor protections, to the idea that work should not destroy your health or consume your entire life, the reality of work in ancient Egypt would be a devastating shock. Within days, your body would be screaming in protest. Your muscles, unaccustomed to this level of sustained physical effort, would be sore, stiff, and weak. Your hands would blister, your back would ache, your feet would hurt from walking and standing on hard ground. Within weeks, if you somehow survived, you would begin to understand the cumulative damage, the way that this kind of labor, sustained over years, wears down the body, causes chronic pain, permanent injuries, and premature aging. You would realize that work in this world is not a path to prosperity, not a way to improve your circumstances, not something you can choose or change. It is simply the price of survival, demanded by the state, enforced by overseers with sticks, and inescapable for everyone except the tiny elite who have the wealth and status to live off the labor of others. And you would understand, perhaps for the first time, what it truly means to be powerless, to have no control over your own time, your own body, your own life. Section 7. Health, Disease, and Medical Care. We have already touched on disease and health problems throughout this journey, but now let's examine this topic in depth, because the prevalence of illness, the lack of effective medical care, and the constant threat of death from infections and injuries that will be trivial in the modern world are perhaps the most profound and most terrifying differences between ancient Egypt and today. In the developed world, we live in an era of unprecedented medical capability. Antibiotics cure bacterial infections. Vaccines prevent diseases that once killed millions. Surgery is performed with precision under sterile conditions with anesthesia. We understand the causes of illness. We can diagnose conditions accurately, and we have treatments for an enormous range of ailments. Life expectancy in developed countries is approaching 80 years, and many people live into their 90s or beyond, remaining relatively healthy and active for much of that time. In ancient Egypt's Middle Kingdom, the situation is almost unimaginably different. Disease is everywhere, affecting everyone, and the medical knowledge and treatments available are a mix of surprisingly sophisticated practical techniques and completely ineffective magical rituals. Doctors exist, some of them highly trained and skilled, but they operate without any understanding of germ theory, without antibiotics, without effective anesthesia, and without most of the tools and knowledge that make modern medicine effective. For ordinary people, access to trained physicians is limited, and most health care is provided by family members, by local healers with traditional knowledge, or by priest-physicians who combine herbal remedies with magical spells and religious rituals. Let's begin with the most common health problems you would face, the diseases and conditions that are endemic in this environment. We have already discussed gastrointestinal diseases caused by contaminated water. Diarrhea, dysentery, and various parasitic infections are so common that they are simply part of the background of daily life. You accept frequent stomach cramps, loose stools, and the occasional bout of severe illness as normal, because everyone around you experiences the same. But these conditions have cumulative effects. Chronic diarrhea leads to malnutrition because your body cannot absorb nutrients properly. Dehydration is a constant risk, especially in the heat, and severe dehydration can lead to shock, organ failure, and death. Parasitic worms, which we have mentioned before, deserve closer examination because they are so widespread and so debilitating. Schistosomiasis, caused by blood flukes, affects perhaps 60 to 70% of the population in areas near canals and slow-moving water. The life cycle of the parasite is complex. The larvae live in freshwater snails, and when you enter the water, they penetrate your skin, usually without causing any immediate sensation. Once inside your body, they migrate through your bloodstream to your lungs, then to your liver, and finally settle in the blood vessels around your bladder or intestines, depending on the species. The adult worms live for years, sometimes decades, producing thousands of eggs each day. These eggs must pass out of your body in urine or feces to continue the life cycle, but many eggs become trapped in your tissues, causing inflammation, scarring, and damage. In the bladder, the eggs cause bleeding, which is why blood in the urine is so common. In the intestines and liver, they cause pain, swelling, and eventual scarring that can lead to cirrhosis, portal hypertension, and liver failure. The disease progresses slowly, and many people live with it for decades, gradually weakening, developing complications, but surviving long enough to pass the infection to others by urinating or defecating in or near water where snails live. Intestinal worms are equally common. Tapeworms, which you contract from eating raw or undercooked fish, pork, or beef, can grow to enormous lengths inside your intestines, sometimes 20 feet or more. They attach to your intestinal wall and absorb nutrients from the food you eat, leaving you malnourished despite eating. You might pass segments of the worm in your stool, flat, white segments that move on their own, a disturbing sight, but one that you have come to expect. Roundworms are smaller, but often more numerous, sometimes present in such numbers that they cause intestinal blockages. Hookworms attach to your intestinal wall and feed on your blood, causing anemia, weakness, and fatigue. Children with heavy hookworm infections develop swollen bellies, stunted growth, and cognitive problems because their brains are not receiving adequate oxygen due to anemia. Threadworms, pinworms, and other species add to the burden, and most people carry multiple types of parasites simultaneously. There are herbal remedies that are sometimes effective at expelling worms. Pomegranate root, certain seeds and oils, and other plant extracts can kill or paralyze some worm species, causing them to be passed in the stool. But these remedies are not consistently effective. Reinfection is immediate because the environment is contaminated, and many people simply accept the worms as a permanent part of their internal fauna. Eye diseases are another major problem. The combination of bright sunlight, blowing sand and dust, flies, and poor hygiene creates ideal conditions for chronic eye infections. Trachoma, caused by the bacterium Chlamydia trachomatis, is endemic. The bacteria are spread by flies that land on the discharge from infected eyes and then land on other people's eyes. The infection causes inflammation of the eyelids and the surface of the eye, and repeated infections over years lead to scarring. The eyelids turn inward, a condition called entropion, so that the eyelashes scrape against the eyeball with every blink, causing pain, further damage, and eventually blindness. Blindness from trachoma is common in older adults. You see them in every village, people in their 40s or 50s, their eyes clouded, their eyelids deformed, their vision gone. They are dependent on family members to guide them, to feed them, to care for them, because there is no social support system, no services for the blind. If your family cannot or will not care for you, you become a beggar, surviving on charity if any is given, starving if it is not. Other eye problems include conjunctivitis, inflammation of the membrane covering the eye, causing redness, discharge, and pain. This can be caused by bacteria, viruses, or irritants like sand and smoke. Cataracts, clouding of the lens of the eye, develop prematurely in many people, possibly due to ultraviolet exposure, nutritional deficiencies, or other factors. By middle age, many people have reduced vision due to cataracts, and there is no effective treatment. Cataract surgery is attempted in some cases, a crude procedure where a sharp instrument is used to push the clouded lens to the side or to remove it entirely, but the success rate is low, and the risks of infection and permanent blindness are high. Malaria is a major killer, especially in the Delta and in areas with standing water. The Anopheles mosquito, which transmits the malaria parasite, breeds in swamps, irrigation canals, and pools left by the flood. When the mosquito bites you, it injects the parasite into your bloodstream, and the parasite invades your red blood cells, multiplies, and causes them to burst, releasing more parasites and triggering the fever cycle that is characteristic of malaria. The symptoms come in waves. You develop a high fever, shaking, chills, sweating, headache, and body aches. The fever spikes, sometimes reaching dangerous levels, and then breaks, leaving you drenched in sweat and exhausted. A day or two later, it happens again and again in a regular cycle. Some people develop immunity after repeated infections, but this immunity is not complete, and they can still become sick, just less severely. Children and pregnant women are especially vulnerable, and severe malaria can cause seizures, coma, organ failure, and death. There is no treatment beyond trying to reduce the fever with cool water, keeping the patient hydrated, and hoping their body can fight off the infection. Some herbal remedies are used, but none are truly effective against malaria. The disease kills thousands every year, and many more are left weakened, anemic, and vulnerable to other infections. Tuberculosis is another chronic killer. This bacterial infection primarily affects the lungs, causing a persistent cough, weight loss, night sweats, fatigue, and coughing up blood. It is highly contagious, spread through the air when an infected person coughs or sneezes, and in the close quarters of Egyptian homes, it spreads easily from person to person. The disease progresses slowly, over months or years, and there is no cure. Some people's immune systems manage to contain the infection, walling it off in small nodules in the lungs, but the bacteria remain dormant and can reactivate later. Others develop active disease that steadily destroys their lungs, leaving them unable to breathe, unable to work, wasting away until they die. Tuberculosis can also spread beyond the lungs, infecting bones, joints, the spine, the kidneys, and other organs. Spinal tuberculosis, known as Pott's disease, causes destruction of vertebrae, leading to deformity, paralysis, and chronic pain. Skeletal remains from ancient Egypt show evidence of tuberculosis in bone, confirming that the disease was widespread and caused significant disability and death. Leprosy, though less common than tuberculosis, is also present. This chronic bacterial infection affects the skin, nerves, and mucous membranes, causing disfiguring lesions, loss of sensation, and progressive damage to hands, feet, and face. People with leprosy are often ostracized, feared, and avoided because of the visible deformities and the belief that the disease is a curse or punishment from the gods. There is no effective treatment, and those afflicted live out their lives in increasing disability and social isolation. Dental problems, which we have touched on before, are severe and widespread. By age 30, most people have multiple cavities, abscesses, and broken teeth from the abrasive bread and the lack of dental care. Abscesses are particularly dangerous. The tooth becomes infected, and pus accumulates in the root and surrounding bone. The pain is intense, constant, throbbing, radiating through the jaw and into the head. The face swells, the gums turn red and tender, and fever develops as the infection spreads. Without antibiotics, the body must fight the infection on its own. Sometimes the abscess ruptures, draining pus into the mouth, and the pressure is relieved temporarily, though the infection often returns. Sometimes the infection spreads into the bloodstream, causing sepsis, or into the tissues of the face and neck, causing cellulitis and potentially fatal complications. The only treatment is to pull the tooth, a procedure done without anesthesia, with crude tools, and with significant risk of further infection. Tooth extraction is brutal. You are held down by strong hands. A tool, perhaps a type of forceps or a lever, is used to grip the tooth and wrench it from its socket. The pain is excruciating, beyond anything most modern people have experienced, and the procedure can take minutes of pulling, twisting, and breaking before the tooth finally comes free. Afterward, you are left with a bleeding hole in your jaw, which you rinse with water or wine and pack with cloth, and you hope that infection does not set in. Skin diseases and infections are also common. Any cut, scrape, or wound can become infected in this environment where everything is contaminated with dirt and bacteria. A simple cut from a farming tool, a thorn embedded in your foot, a burn from a cooking fire, all of these can lead to serious infections if not treated properly, and proper treatment is often not available. The infection begins as redness and swelling around the wound. Pus forms, a thick yellow or green discharge. The area becomes hot to the touch, painful, and the infection can spread rapidly through the surrounding tissue, causing cellulitis, or into the bloodstream, causing sepsis. Red streaks appear on the skin, tracking the infection along the blood vessels. Fever develops, along with chills, rapid heartbeat, and confusion. Without antibiotics, sepsis often leads to shock, organ failure, and death within days. Some infections cause abscesses, pockets of pus that must be drained. This is done by cutting into the abscess with a blade and allowing the pus to flow out, a procedure that is painful and carries risks of spreading the infection further. Honey is sometimes used as a dressing for wounds, and it does have antibacterial properties that can help prevent infection, but it is not always available and it cannot cure an established infection. Childbirth, as we have discussed, is one of the most dangerous events in a woman's life. Maternal mortality is high, with estimates suggesting that perhaps 1 in 50 to 1 in 20 births results in the death of the mother. The causes are varied: hemorrhage, infection, obstructed labor, eclampsia, and complications that cannot be managed without modern medical intervention. Labor can last for days, and prolonged labor exhausts the mother and increases the risk of complications. If the baby is in the wrong position, if it is too large, if the pelvis is too small, the birth cannot proceed normally. In the modern world, a caesarean section would be performed, but in ancient Egypt, there is no safe surgical option. The baby dies, and often the mother dies as well. In some cases, the baby is surgically removed after the mother's death in an attempt to save the child, but the survival rate for such infants is very low. Puerperal fever, infection of the uterus after childbirth, is a major killer. The midwife's hands, the environment, the lack of hygiene all contribute to bacterial contamination. The symptoms develop within days of delivery: fever, foul-smelling discharge, abdominal pain, and rapid deterioration. Without antibiotics, the infection spreads, causes sepsis, and the woman dies, leaving behind a newborn who may or may not survive without its mother. Now let's talk about the medical care that is available, because despite the lack of modern knowledge and tools, Egyptian medicine is more sophisticated than in many other ancient cultures. The Egyptians have accumulated a significant body of practical medical knowledge, recorded in medical papyri that have survived to modern times. The most famous of these are the Edwin Smith Papyrus, which focuses on surgery and trauma, and the Ebers Papyrus, which covers a wide range of diseases and treatments. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, dating to around 1600 BCE, but likely copied from older texts from the Middle Kingdom or earlier, is remarkably systematic. It describes 48 cases of injuries and wounds, organized from head to toe, and for each case, it provides a diagnosis, prognosis, and treatment recommendations. The papyrus distinguishes between cases that can be treated, cases that are challenging but might be manageable, and cases that are untreatable. This shows a pragmatic, empirical approach, recognizing the limits of medical intervention. Treatments described include setting broken bones, stitching wounds, applying bandages and splints, and using various substances as dressings. The Egyptians can set a broken arm or leg, aligning the bones and immobilizing the limb with wooden splints bound with linen strips, allowing the bone to heal. They can stitch large wounds using thread, closing the edges to promote healing. They can apply pressure to stop bleeding, and they use cautery, burning tissue with hot metal to seal blood vessels. But there are severe limitations. There is no understanding of infection, no concept of sterilizing instruments, or maintaining a clean surgical field. Surgeries are performed with tools that have been used before, not cleaned beyond a simple wiping. Hands are not washed in a meaningful way. The risk of post-surgical infection is enormous, and many patients who survive the procedure die days or weeks later from infection. There is no effective anesthesia. For minor procedures, the patient simply endures the pain. For more extensive surgeries, they might be given wine or beer to drink beforehand, or they might be given opium derived from poppies, which can dull pain and induce drowsiness, but does not eliminate consciousness or sensation. Major surgery, such as amputation of a limb, is performed with the patient fully conscious, restrained by assistants, experiencing agony that is almost impossible to imagine. The Ebers Papyrus covers a broader range of conditions, including internal diseases, skin problems, eye ailments, gynecological issues, and many others. It prescribes hundreds of remedies, most of them made from plants, minerals, and animal products. Some of these remedies have genuine medical value. Willow bark, for example, contains salicylic acid, the active ingredient in aspirin, and is effective for reducing pain and fever. Honey, as mentioned, has antibacterial properties and is used for wound dressing. Garlic has antimicrobial effects. Various herbs have laxative, diuretic, or anti-inflammatory properties that can provide symptomatic relief. But many of the remedies are ineffective or even harmful. The papyri prescribe concoctions made from animal dung, urine, rotten meat, and other substances that are not only useless but actively dangerous, introducing more bacteria and toxins into the body. The line between medicine and magic is blurred. Remedies are often accompanied by incantations, spells that must be recited while preparing or administering the treatment. The belief is that illness can be caused by evil spirits, by the anger of gods, or by curses, and that magical intervention is as important as physical treatment. Doctors in ancient Egypt are often also priests, serving in temples known as houses of life, where medical texts are stored and studied. These priest-physicians are educated, literate, and trained in the medical traditions, but their understanding is still fundamentally limited by the lack of knowledge about anatomy, physiology, and the causes of disease. They do not understand that diseases are caused by microorganisms. They do not know how the circulatory system works, though they recognize that the heart is important and that pulse can indicate the state of health. They do not understand the function of most internal organs. When you fall ill, if you are wealthy enough to afford a physician, you might be examined. The doctor will ask about your symptoms, observe your appearance, feel your pulse, examine your body for signs of swelling, lesions, or abnormality. He will smell your breath, your sweat, your excretions, because odor is believed to provide diagnostic information. He will make a diagnosis based on his training and experience, and he will prescribe treatment. The treatment might include herbal remedies, dietary changes, rest, bloodletting, or purging. Bloodletting, the practice of deliberately removing blood from the body, is based on the belief that illness is caused by imbalances in the body's fluids, and that removing excess blood can restore balance. It is done by making small cuts in the skin or by applying leeches. In some cases, it might provide temporary relief, but more often, it weakens the patient further, making recovery less likely. Purging, inducing vomiting or diarrhea with laxatives and emetics, is another common treatment. The belief is that illness can be expelled from the body, that the disease is a material substance that must be forced out. Like bloodletting, purging weakens the patient and does nothing to address the underlying cause of illness. For ordinary people, access to trained physicians is limited or non-existent. Instead, you rely on local healers, often older women with knowledge of traditional remedies passed down through generations. These healers use herbs, apply poultices, perform simple procedures like lancing boils, and provide comfort and support. They also perform magical rituals, invoking protective gods like Bes or Tauret, creating amulets, reciting spells. The combination of practical remedies and magical intervention is the best care available to most people, and while it sometimes helps, it often does not. Life expectancy, as we have mentioned, is short by modern standards. Infant mortality is extremely high, with perhaps 40 to 50% of children dying before the age of 5. Those who survive childhood have a life expectancy of perhaps 30 to 40 years on average, though this is misleading because it is heavily influenced by infant mortality. If you survive to adulthood, you might live into your 40s, 50s, or even 60s if you are fortunate, but you will age prematurely, worn down by labor, disease, malnutrition, and the cumulative effects of a lifetime of hardship. By your 30s, you look and feel much older than a modern 30-year-old. Your hair, if you have it, is graying or gone. Your teeth are broken and decayed. Your skin is weathered and wrinkled. Your joints are arthritic and painful. Your spine is curved from years of bent labor. You move slowly, stiffly, and you tire easily. By your 40s, you are considered old, and by your 50s, if you reach them, you are an elder, a rare survivor. For a modern person, accustomed to doctors who can diagnose accurately, to hospitals with sterile operating rooms, to antibiotics that cure infections, to pain relief that is effective and safe, to dental care that is routine and painless, the medical reality of ancient Egypt would be terrifying. A simple infection that would be cured with a week of antibiotics in the modern world becomes a life-threatening crisis. Broken bone that will be set and casted, with full recovery expected, becomes a permanent disability or a death sentence if infection sets in. A toothache that will be treated with a filling or root canal becomes months of agony followed by a brutal extraction. You would realize very quickly that your health, your life, hangs by the thinnest of threads, and that there is no safety net, no reliable medical care, no way to protect yourself from the countless diseases and injuries that surround you. And you would understand that this, perhaps more than anything else, is why you would not survive in ancient Egypt's Middle Kingdom. Not because you lack courage or strength, but because modern medicine has made us soft, dependent on interventions that do not exist in the ancient world, and vulnerable to threats that our ancestors endured but that we could not. Section 8. Social hierarchy and lack of freedom. Let's turn now to the social and political structure of ancient Egypt. Because even if you could somehow adapt to the physical hardships, even if your body could endure the labor and survive the diseases, the lack of personal freedom, the rigid hierarchy, and the total control exercised by the state would be oppressive in ways that are difficult for a modern person to comprehend. We live in an era that values individual rights, personal autonomy, democracy, and the rule of law. We expect to have choices about our lives, about where we live, what work we do, whom we marry, how we spend our time. We expect that the government, while powerful, has limits on its authority, and that we have rights that cannot be violated without due process. These expectations, these assumptions about freedom and rights, simply do not apply in ancient Egypt. Egyptian society is hierarchical, rigidly structured, with each person occupying a specific position determined primarily by birth. At the very top of this hierarchy is the pharaoh, the king, who is not just a political ruler but a living god, the incarnation of Horus, the son of Ra, the intermediary between the human world and the divine. The pharaoh's authority is absolute, unquestionable, and divinely sanctioned. His word is law, his decisions are final, and his person is sacred. To even approach the pharaoh requires elaborate protocols, rituals of purification, and permission from officials. For an ordinary person, the pharaoh is a distant, almost abstract figure, someone you might see once in your life during a royal procession, or never see at all, but whose power shapes every aspect of your existence. Below the pharaoh is the vizier, the highest administrative official, who manages the day-to-day operations of the government. During the Middle Kingdom, particularly under strong rulers like Senusret III, the vizier's power is immense, overseeing all branches of the administration, all building projects, all taxation, all legal matters. Below the vizier are layers of officials, nomarchs who govern regions, treasurers who manage resources, overseers who direct labor, military commanders who control troops, and judges who adjudicate disputes. Then come the scribes, the literate elite who form the backbone of the bureaucracy. Scribes are trained from childhood in the difficult art of reading and writing hieroglyphics, hieratic script, and later demotic script. They keep records, write letters, copy texts, calculate taxes, record harvests, track labor obligations, and perform the countless administrative tasks that keep the state functioning. To be a scribe is to have status, security, and power, because literacy is rare. Perhaps only 1 to 2% of the population can read and write, and those who can are indispensable. Below the scribes are priests, who serve in the temples, performing rituals, maintaining offerings to the gods, managing temple estates. Priests are educated, often coming from scribal families, and they form a significant part of the elite. Then come the artisans, skilled craftspeople, potters, weavers, carpenters, metalworkers, jewelers, who produce the goods that society needs and that the elite desire. Artisans have more status than farmers, and their work is less physically demanding, though still hard, but they are still subject to state control and taxation. Below the artisans are soldiers, who can be conscripts or professional troops, and below them merchants and traders, though trade in Egypt is often state-controlled, and merchants have less independence than in some other ancient societies. And then, at the bottom of the hierarchy, making up the vast majority of the population, are the farmers and labourers, people like you, who own little or nothing, who work the land, who owe labour and goods to the state, and who have almost no voice in how they are governed. At the very bottom are servants and slaves, though slavery in Egypt is not as widespread or as brutal as in some other ancient societies. Slaves might be prisoners of war, criminals, or people who have sold themselves or their children into servitude to pay debts. They have even less freedom than farmers, but in practice, the difference is not always enormous, because farmers are so heavily burdened by obligations that their freedom is more theoretical than real. Your position in this hierarchy is determined by your birth. If you are born into a farming family, you will be a farmer. Your father's occupation is your occupation. There is no career counseling, no opportunity to explore your interests or talents and choose a different path. Social mobility is almost non-existent. The only way to rise is through education, becoming a scribe. But access to education is restricted to the children of the elite. A farming family cannot afford to send a child to school, cannot spare the labor, and would not be accepted into scribal training even if they tried. The result is that you are locked into your position from birth, and you will pass that position to your children, and they to theirs, generation after generation. The system is designed to be stable, to maintain order, to preserve the hierarchy, and it is remarkably effective at doing so for centuries. Your obligations to the state are numerous and inescapable. You owe taxes, paid in grain, in goods, or in labor. The tax rate is assessed by officials who come to your village, measure your fields, estimate your harvest, and determine what you owe. You have no say in this assessment. You cannot argue that it is too high, that the harvest was poor, that you need more to feed your family. The assessment is recorded by scribes, and you are expected to deliver what is owed. If you fail to meet your tax obligation, the consequences are swift and harsh. Officials arrive with sticks, and you are beaten publicly as a warning to others. Your possessions might be confiscated, your livestock taken, your stored grain seized. You might be imprisoned, held until your family can pay what is owed, or until you can work off the debt through additional labor. The system is designed to extract maximum value from the population, and it does so efficiently and without mercy. You also owe corvée labor, as we have discussed, a certain number of days or weeks each year working on state projects. This obligation is tracked by scribes, and when your name is called, you must report. Failure to do so is a serious offense, punishable by beating, imprisonment, or being branded as a fugitive, which makes you a target for arrest wherever you go. Even your movements are controlled. You cannot simply decide to leave your village and move to another town or region. Travel requires permission, documentation, letters of passage that must be obtained from officials. There are checkpoints, places where officials stop travelers and demand to see their papers, to verify that they have legitimate reasons for being on the road. If you cannot produce the proper documents, you can be detained, questioned, and sent back to where you came from, or worse, conscripted into a labor gang or arrested as a fugitive. This system of control is maintained through a vast bureaucracy of scribes and officials who keep meticulous records. Censuses are conducted regularly, recording the names, ages, and occupations of everyone in each household, tracking births and deaths, monitoring who owes what and when. The records are stored in administrative centers, in temples, and they are consulted whenever decisions need to be made about taxation, labor conscription, or legal matters. The legal system is based on custom, precedent, and the judgment of officials, not on a written code of laws that applies equally to everyone. If you have a dispute with a neighbor over a property boundary, over a debt, over an injury, you can bring your case before a local council of elders or before an official. Witnesses are called, oaths are sworn, and a decision is made. But the outcome depends heavily on your status, your connections, and the disposition of the person judging the case. If your opponent is wealthier, better connected, or simply more persuasive, you are likely to lose, regardless of the facts. Punishments for crimes are severe. Theft can result in beatings, mutilation, cutting off a hand or an ear, or even death for repeat offenders. Assault, especially against a person of higher status, is punished harshly. Murder can result in execution. False testimony in legal proceedings can result in the punishment that the accused would have received. A strong incentive to tell the truth but also a deterrent to bringing accusations unless you are certain. For women, the social constraints are even tighter in some ways. Egyptian women actually have more legal rights than women in many other ancient societies. You can own property, inherit, initiate divorce under certain circumstances, and represent yourself in legal matters. But your primary role is still defined by your relationship to men, as a daughter, wife, or mother. Your value is measured by your ability to manage a household, to bear children, to support your husband's work. Marriage is arranged, typically by your family, and it happens young, often by age 12 or 13. Your husband is chosen based on family alliances, economic considerations, proximity, not based on your preferences or feelings. Love might develop over time, and some marriages are undoubtedly affectionate and supportive, but the primary purpose of marriage is practical: to produce children, to create economic partnerships, to fulfill social expectations. Once married, you are expected to obey your husband, to manage his household, to bear and raise his children. Domestic violence is not uncommon, and while there are legal protections in theory, in practice, a husband has considerable latitude in how he treats his wife. If the abuse becomes extreme, you might seek divorce, but divorce carries social stigma, and your options afterward are limited. You might return to your father's household if he is still alive and willing to take you, or you might remarry, or you might try to support yourself through your own labor, which is difficult and precarious. Childbearing is your most important duty, and you are expected to have many children. Contraception exists in rudimentary forms, pessaries made from various substances, herbal remedies that are supposed to prevent conception, but they are not reliable. If you are sexually active, pregnancy is almost inevitable, and you might become pregnant 6, 8, 10 times in your life, each pregnancy carrying the risk of complications and death. If you do not bear children, if you are infertile, or if your children all die young, you are viewed as cursed, as having failed in your primary purpose. The social pressure, the sense of failure, the fear of being abandoned by your husband, all of this creates immense psychological stress that has no outlet, no therapy, no support beyond what your family might provide. For both men and women, the lack of freedom extends into every area of life. You do not choose your occupation. You do not choose where you live. You do not choose how you spend your time, because your time belongs to your work, to your family, to the state. You do not have privacy, because you live in close quarters with your family and neighbors, and because the state monitors your activities through its bureaucracy. You do not have freedom of speech. Criticizing the pharaoh, the officials, the system is dangerous. Speaking against the established order can be interpreted as treason, as a threat to Ma'at, the cosmic order that Egyptians believe holds the world together. Such speech can result in punishment, imprisonment, or even execution. So you keep your thoughts to yourself. You express your frustrations only in private, among people you trust completely. And even then, you are careful, because informants exist, and loyalty to the state is rewarded. You do not have freedom of religion. The state religion, the worship of the traditional gods, the performance of rituals and offerings, is mandatory. You cannot decide to worship different gods, to adopt a foreign religion, or to be an atheist. Such choices would mark you as dangerous, as a threat to order, and would result in social ostracism at minimum and possibly legal punishment. For a modern person, raised with ideals of democracy, human rights, individual liberty, and personal autonomy, the social reality of ancient Egypt would be suffocating. You would chafe against the restrictions, against the lack of choice, against the constant surveillance and control. You would want to speak freely, to criticize injustice, to demand better treatment, and you would quickly learn that such impulses are dangerous, that expressing them can result in punishment, and that survival requires submission, obedience, and silence. You would realize that you are not a free individual with rights and agency. You are a subject, a resource, a unit of labor that the state uses as it sees fit, and that your life, your body, your time, all belong to the system, not to you. And you would understand that this psychological burden, this loss of autonomy and dignity, is as heavy and as damaging as any physical hardship you might endure. Section 9. Environmental hardships. We have discussed many specific challenges: heat, disease, lack of food, oppressive social control. But let's now step back and look at the broader environmental context, because the natural world in ancient Egypt, for all its life-giving properties, is also hostile, dangerous, and filled with threats that a modern person would find terrifying, and that ancient Egyptians lived with every single day. The climate is extreme. We have mentioned the heat during Shemu, temperatures exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit for months at a time, but it's worth emphasizing just how oppressive this heat is when you have no way to escape it. There is no air conditioning, no refrigeration, no ice. You cannot retreat into a cool building and wait out the worst of the day. Your house, with its thick mud brick walls, is cooler than the outside, but only marginally. By midday, even indoors, the temperature is stifling, the air heavy and still. If you are working outside, in the fields, in a quarry, on a building site, the sun is relentless. It beats down on your bare head, your bare shoulders, your exposed skin. The ground radiates heat, the air shimmers, and you feel as though you are being baked alive. You sweat profusely, soaking your clothing, and your body loses fluids faster than you can replace them. Dehydration sets in quickly, causing dizziness, weakness, confusion, and if not treated, collapse and death. There is no shade in the fields, no trees except the occasional palm. You work through the heat because you must, because stopping means falling behind, failing to meet quotas, risking punishment. You drink your warm, stale water or beer whenever you can, but it is never enough, never satisfying. Your lips crack, your tongue swells, your head pounds, and you push on because there is no alternative. At night, especially during the winter months, the temperature drops dramatically. The desert has no moisture to hold heat, and once the sun sets, the air cools rapidly, sometimes dropping 40 or 50 degrees from the daytime high. You have no heating, no warm clothing beyond a rough wool blanket if you are fortunate. You huddle with your family for warmth, bodies pressed together, and you shiver through the cold hours, waiting for dawn when the temperature will climb again. The contrast between day and night, between summer and winter, creates a constant physical stress that your body must adapt to. You are never truly comfortable, never at a temperature that feels pleasant and stable. You are either too hot or too cold, and your body is constantly working to regulate its temperature, burning energy and resources that are already in short supply. Beyond the heat and cold, there is dust. Egypt is surrounded by desert, and the wind frequently carries clouds of fine sand and dust from the Sahara, blowing across the Nile Valley, reducing visibility, making it difficult to breathe. These dust storms can last for hours or days, coating everything in a layer of grit. You cover your face with a cloth, but the dust still gets into your eyes, your nose, your mouth. You breathe it, and it settles in your lungs, causing chronic respiratory problems. Your house fills with dust despite your efforts to keep it out, and you spend hours sweeping and cleaning after every storm, only to have it happen again a few days later. The wildlife also poses significant dangers. Scorpions are common, especially in the drier areas and along the desert margins. They hide in cracks in walls, under rocks, in piles of firewood, and they come into houses at night, searching for insects to eat. Scorpion stings are painful, causing immediate burning sensation, swelling, and in some cases, more severe symptoms like difficulty breathing, muscle spasms, and in young children or vulnerable adults, potentially death. You learn to shake out your sandals before putting them on, to check your bedding before lying down, but you cannot eliminate the risk. Scorpions are always present, and encounters are inevitable. Snakes are another constant threat. Egypt is home to several species of venomous snakes, including cobras, vipers, and asps. These snakes live in the fields, along the riverbanks, in the desert, and sometimes in or near human dwellings. You might step on a snake while walking through tall grass or reach into a storage jar and encounter one hiding inside. Snake bites can be fatal, especially if the snake injects a large amount of venom. The venom causes pain, swelling, tissue damage, and in the case of neurotoxic venoms, paralysis and respiratory failure. There is no antivenin, no effective treatment beyond trying to immobilize the affected limb, sucking out venom if possible, and hoping that the person's body can fight off their effects. The Egyptians have rituals and magical practices intended to protect against snakes, invoking gods like Wadjet, the cobra goddess, and they train snake charmers who claim to be able to handle serpents safely through magical knowledge. But people still die from snake bites regularly, and the fear of encountering a venomous snake is a constant background anxiety. Crocodiles are perhaps the most dangerous animals in the Egyptian environment. The Nile crocodile can grow to lengths of 15 feet or more, and they are powerful, fast, and aggressive predators. They lie in wait in the water, submerged except for their eyes and nostrils, and when prey comes close, they lunge with terrifying speed, grabbing the victim in their jaws and dragging them into the water. Crocodiles kill by drowning, holding their prey underwater until it stops struggling, and then they tear the body apart, consuming it over days as the flesh softens. Every time you approach the river to collect water, to wash clothes, to fish, to bathe, you are aware of the danger. You watch for ripples, for shadows, for any sign of movement in the water. You stay alert, you never turn your back on the river, and you move quickly, minimizing your exposure. But crocodile attacks still happen, frequently. Someone collecting water at dusk, a child playing too close to the bank, a fisherman reaching into the water to retrieve a net. Any of these can become victims. The crocodile strikes, and in seconds the person is gone, pulled under, and their family is left with grief and the knowledge that the river that gives life also takes it. Hippopotamuses are even more dangerous, responsible for more human deaths than crocodiles. Hippos are territorial, unpredictable, and incredibly powerful, weighing several tons and capable of running faster than a human for short distances. They spend much of their time in the water, and if you are in a boat and you drift too close to a hippo, especially a mother with a calf, the animal can attack, capsizing the boat with ease, biting it in half, crushing people in its massive jaws. On land, hippos are equally dangerous. They leave the water at night to graze, and if you encounter one in the dark, on a path near a field, the hippo may perceive you as a threat and charge. A charging hippo is almost impossible to escape. It is too fast, too large, and its jaws can crush bone. People are killed by hippos regularly, and there is little that can be done except avoid areas where hippos are known to be active and to move carefully and quietly at night. Lions, though less common in the settled areas by the Middle Kingdom period, still exist in the desert fringes and in the marshlands of the delta. They occasionally attack livestock, and more rarely humans. Hunting lions is a royal prerogative, a demonstration of the pharaoh's courage and power, depicted in art and texts as a heroic activity. But for ordinary people, a lion is a deadly threat to be avoided at all costs. Insects, beyond the flies and mosquitoes we have already discussed, include bees, wasps, and various biting and stinging species. A bee or wasp sting is painful, and some people have severe allergic reactions that can be life-threatening. Ants infest stored grain and food supplies, and certain species have painful bites. Beetles and other pests damage crops and stored goods, and there is no effective way to control them beyond manual removal and hoping the damage is not too severe. The Nile itself, while the source of all life, is also unpredictable and dangerous. Most years, the flood is reliable, rising to levels that are adequate for agriculture, covering the fields, depositing silt, and then receding on schedule. But there are years when the flood is insufficient, when the water does not rise high enough, when large areas of agricultural land remain dry and crops cannot be planted. These are famine years, and they are remembered in texts and inscriptions as times of great suffering. During a low Nile, the harvest fails, food becomes scarce, prices rise beyond what anyone can afford, and people starve. The state may have granaries, reserves stored from better years, but these are not always sufficient, not always distributed fairly, and many people, especially the poor, die. Famine leads to social breakdown, to increased crime, to desperate measures as people struggle to survive. And then there are years when the flood is too high, when the water rises beyond its normal bounds, when it breaches dikes, floods villages, destroys houses, drowns livestock, and ruins stored grain. These floods are catastrophic, and recovery takes years. Homes must be rebuilt, fields must be reclaimed, irrigation systems must be repaired, and in the meantime people suffer. Living with this level of environmental uncertainty, with the constant awareness that your survival depends on forces you cannot predict or control, creates a psychological burden that is difficult to quantify. You live in a state of constant low-level anxiety, hoping that the flood will be good, that the snakes will stay away, that the crocodiles will not take anyone you love, that disease will not sweep through the village, that the next season will be better than the last. For a modern person, accustomed to predictable and controlled environments, to safety measures and protections against wildlife, to climate-controlled spaces and reliable water systems, the environmental reality of ancient Egypt would be overwhelming. Within days, you would be exhausted by the heat, afraid of the wildlife, disturbed by the unpredictability, and desperate for the safety and comfort of the modern world. You would realize that nature, which we often romanticize as beautiful and peaceful, is in fact harsh, indifferent, and filled with dangers that our ancestors had to confront every single day. Section 10. Conclusion and Closing. We have traveled a long way together tonight, through the heat and dust of ancient Egypt's Middle Kingdom, through the mud-brick villages and the green fields, through the rhythm of the seasons and the grinding reality of daily labor. We have woken in the darkness, eaten bland bread and warm beer, worked until our backs ached and our hands bled, fallen ill with diseases that have no cure, endured the control of the state and the hierarchy of society, and faced the dangers of a world where nature is both provider and predator. So now, let's answer the question that has guided this entire journey. Why wouldn't you last a day in ancient Egypt's Middle Kingdom? The answer, as you have seen, is not simple, because it is not just one thing that would defeat you. It is everything all at once, compounding and overwhelming. You would struggle with the heat from the very first hour, your modern body unaccustomed to sustained exposure to temperatures above 100 degrees with no relief. You would be desperately thirsty, but afraid to drink the contaminated water that is all you have access to. You would need to relieve yourself, but the lack of sanitation, the absence of toilets and privacy would be profoundly distressing. You would be hungry, but the food available, bread full of grit, warm beer, raw onions, would be unappetizing and unsatisfying. You would be uncomfortable in your rough, scratchy linen garment, your bare feet already blistered from walking on hot, rough ground. You would be bitten by insects, tormented by flies, itching from the dust and sweat. You would be expected to work, to labor in the fields or on a state project, and the physical demands would be beyond anything you have experienced. Your muscles would scream, your back would ache, and you would realize within hours that you simply do not have the strength or stamina to sustain this level of effort. And then, within a day or two, you would fall ill. The contaminated water, the food prepared in unhygienic conditions, the exposure to parasites and bacteria that your immune system has never encountered, all of this would assault your body. You would develop diarrhea, cramping, perhaps fever, and without modern medicine, without antibiotics and IV fluids, your condition could deteriorate rapidly. A simple cut or scrape, infected in this environment where everything is contaminated, could lead to sepsis and death within days. Even if you somehow avoided immediate illness, even if you were lucky, the cumulative effects would defeat you. The lack of sleep on a hard sleeping mat with no pillow and no privacy would exhaust you. The constant labor would break down your muscles and joints. The malnutrition, the lack of vitamins and variety in the diet would weaken you over days and weeks. The psychological stress, the lack of freedom, the constant surveillance and control, the knowledge that you have no rights and no escape would wear on your mind. You would not last because you are not adapted to this world. Your body has been raised in comfort, with clean water, abundant food, modern medicine, climate control, and all the infrastructure that makes modern life safe and relatively easy. Your mind has been shaped by expectations of freedom, choice, autonomy, and rights. All of that would be stripped away in ancient Egypt, and you would be left naked, exposed, vulnerable to forces that you cannot control or understand. But it is important, as we close, to remember that the ancient Egyptians who lived through this, who endured these conditions for their entire lives, were not superhuman. They were people, just like you, with the same needs, the same emotions, the same capacity for suffering and joy. What they had was adaptation, resilience built over generations, bodies and minds shaped by their environment, and the simple fact that they knew nothing different. They found meaning in their lives despite the hardships. They loved their families, they took pride in their work, they celebrated festivals and found moments of happiness amid the struggle. They believed in their gods, they hoped for a better afterlife, and they built one of the greatest civilizations in human history, creating art, literature, architecture, and systems.